Hello. Please let me know if y'all can see me and hear me. That way I know I'm not just talking into the void by myself. If anybody's there. Hope you're all doing well today. It's so good to see you. It looks like we're live, at least in one place. Let me make sure we're live in the other place. Yes, we are. Okay, great. Welcome, one and all, to another episode of Lorebeards. And while I pull up the thing I'm going to have to pull up here, I'm going to let Andy talk for just a second.
Hello. Like Setra the Imperishable, like that ancient tomb king of tomb kings who had ruled for altogether far too many years, centuries ill measured by normal mortal man, today I arise like the undead themselves. I am not frightfully well, but I am nevertheless here because there is no way on earth I'm missing out on Setra action, because Setra is arguably one of the coolest characters in the entire setting, and also enormously influential in a way that most of the writers both forget about and then write about really heavily whenever they discuss him. They somehow manage to say he is both the complete dog's bollocks, to drop in a good old UK phrase, and then withdraw and say, and then, of course, Nehekhara was over there doing stuff for several centuries. What? So I'm really looking forward to a certain thing occurring. I'm about to bring it up. It's so heavy. It's so heavy. Oh, yes. Yes.
All the big bucks. All the big bucks.
I'm really looking forward to Setra getting his due. Finally, hopefully, getting a lot of extra detail. Now, admittedly, the old world is almost certainly going to be concentrating on the old world. It's going to be mostly discussing the then and the there of the whole thing. And that's cool, because hopefully through the course of those discussions and all the extra lore that they add, it will also bleed into both the future and the past of this particular character we're going to be discussing today and exactly how they represent. But, much more importantly, look at this fucking thing. Look at my box. Now, I have purposefully not opened it in the same way that good old Sotek purposefully has opened and devoured everything, so that we've got ourselves a nice disparate version of how things go on. So on his side, things are very much Dread Kingy. On my side, they're very much Witch Kingy when it comes to Malekith. Oh, is that clear? Malekith, or however you wish to present these things.
A Marvel character?
No, he's Warhammer. Wasn't he? So, we're in a slightly different place this week, which is super fun because Sotek's done all of the reading over there, so he's going to be bringing in some extra details, which for me are going to be super exciting too, because I purposely avoided them up to this point. I'm going to be devouring my box and books over the course of this week.
Yes, but there is something very important we have to start with first. Something that whenever you talk about Setra, you have to go over because it's contractually obligated and there's no getting around it.
Yes, it is.
Which is that we need to understand who precisely we're talking about. So, buckle up as I try as rapidly as I can get through this brief opening.
So tell me, Mr. Sotek, exactly who is Setra?
Oh, mighty Setra, the great king of Nehekhara, the imperishable, Khemrikhara, king of kings, opener of the way, wielder of the divine flame, punisher of nomads, the great unifier, commander of the golden legion, sacred of appearance, bringer of light, father of hawks, builder of cities, protector of the two worlds, keeper of the hours, chosen of Petra, high steward of the horizon, sailor of the great Vitae, sentinel of the two realms, the undisputed, begetter of the begat, scourge of the faithless, carrion feeder, first of the charnel valley, rider of the sacred chariot, mighty lion of the infinite desert, lord of the shifting sands, he who holds the scepter, great hawk of the heavens, waker of the Hierotitan, monarch of the sky, king of the shifting sands, champion of the gods, and many, many more.
Yeah, I freaking love Setra. He's a great character, and I'm really looking forward to doing a deep dive into exactly who he is. I do have one other thing we're going to say before we begin, though. In fact, we've got two other things we're going to say. Number one is last week we really kind of enjoyed just having a certain amount of space for us to chat through all of our various lore goodies. However, we felt that as the super chats came in, many of them were forgotten by the time we brought them up at the end. So we're going to do somewhat of a compromise this week, and we're going to see how it goes. In that, we're going to finish each of our sections and then bring up our super chats, have a little chat to see where everybody's at, and then we'll dive back into each of our sections again. So before we begin, we have already had 2 super chats. Number 1.
Not very impressed with Setra. His volleyball game is terrible. He can't even serve. Yeah, no, he has a very strict way of playing.
Good one. That was a good one. As you will find out later. And Sean Schultz. Real
quick, Biofoot. No, I'm not doing Rap God speed. I like my tongue where it is, and it's going to fall out if I do it like that. How many titles does he have? So we don't know how many are not written, but what we do know is that the Herald Nekaph, who probably has a bit of ceremony to the way he talks when he talks about Setra's titles, it takes him 2 hours to get through all of Setra's titles. He's timed it to a really solid 2 hours. So, it takes him a hot bit, but it's not quite, it's ridiculously long, but it's not like it's rising, setting of the sun levels long. Because he was mortal when he memorized the list. Setra may not surf, but Kalita hangs 10. That she does. And Czar94, yes, thank you for sponsoring the read-off of Setra's very many titles. We appreciate it. Thank you all very much. So, let's get into some really, really fun discussion. I will say I'm very pleased that I only got about maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours of sleep last night because I just was going through all of the old world.
This is going to be quite the stream.
Yeah, I'm mostly here. But there's a lot of really interesting things to discuss about the setting. Though luckily, the good news is that they didn't change a lot. They more just kind of added to what we already have, which is really good because otherwise this would be a much messier discussion. So we're going to start with kind of setting the stage of what led up to Setra in the world, which is, of course, the land of Nehekhara itself. Nehekhara is this desert kingdom that used to be very different than it is now. Where now it's known as the land of the dead, and it's a horrible place where very few things living are. But back in the day, it was in many ways the cradle of civilization. It was a bountiful land that had the great river, Vitae River, that just brought life, all these beautiful waters down from the mountains, and it's a huge river. It's absolutely monstrous in size, and civilization cropped up all along this river, and there are many tribes of humans that, according to some legends, came out from the southern jungles, or maybe they were created from by the gods themselves within that desert area. Some say they came from the eastern side of the mountains. It's not. Some say they came from somewhere a little further north. It's not exactly known where they came from, though most evidence suggests they came from the jungles. And these humans were nomadic for a time, but eventually set up a series of cities that, as they grew in power and influence, and they started to worship a pantheon of desert gods, who we'll talk more about later, their power and influence began to grow to such an extent that they became city-states. And each of these city-states expanded until they started bumping into one another. And the reason the land is called Nehekhara as a nation is because there's a guy named Nehek, who you may have figured that out because there's things like the invocation of Nehek. He gets mentioned in a lot of different places. And Nehek is a very fascinating character who does not get as much coverage as I wish he did. And the only thing we really know about him is that he was a very prominent king from the city of Khemri. And Nehek rose up and he looked around this land and decided, you know what? I deserve to be in charge of everything. And so he walked around and he beat the crap out of all of the other cities. And whenever he would defeat their monarchs, he would take their crowns and he would have their crowns broken down and assimilated into his own crown. And so over the course of many years, he conquered all of what we know as Nehekhara, including the lands across the World's Edge Mountains through what was known then, what will be known later as the Valley of Kings, and then much later as the Charnel Valley. And he made his Optimus Prime crown by assimilating all of the other crowns. And that is now known as the crown Nehekhara because it's kind of assimilated from all these different pieces to demonstrate that he was the big boss. He was the king of kings, not simply just a king. And ever since that day, Khemri is often known as the City of Kings because whoever rules there, just like Nehek did, is often understood to be the king that rules over all of the others. Now, how much power that said king has over all the others is a little more nebulous. Sometimes it's been a little more of a title as opposed to like an actual form of authority. But as we'll get into later, there is someone who took that ceremonial title very seriously.
A little bit too far. I'll add a couple of extra outside contextual details as well, because it's always worth trying to ground the lore into all of the other details that kick out there too. So first thing first, it's generally perceived or discussed in various Warhammer texts that humans are a young species that have just arisen, have somehow just appeared a later date as these older species have ruled the world for many, many millennia. It's not necessarily the case when you look back at Nehekhara, because Nehekhara starts not just its founding, but starts existing thousands of years before Sigmar's even on the scene. A good 2,500 is when Nehekhara is together largely as one thing, but as the overall land of the gods that apparently it was before, we're talking centuries before that as these cities rise. So we're talking almost 3,000 years, possibly further into the past, before Sigmar has even come on the scene. This is a proper ancient civilization. They are arguably as old as, or perhaps just slightly younger than, what becomes the Grand Empire Cathay, Grand Cathay over there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also, it's worth noting, a human empire. So there is already this feeling that the elder species aren't necessarily that much older when you put it all into context. And it is also worth adding and re-stressing for when we come to it later. Nehekhara is very much one of those places that is grounded in worship, that is grounded in the gods, and they very much believe that the gods walked in their blessed lands as mortals and handed those lands to them. They believe that the gods themselves warred against the chaos gods way, way back when, and then lived there and gave it to their children. In many respects, you can almost see Nehekhara as some sort of human version of Ulthuan, for those of you who have done your Ulthuan elven lore. It is very similar, the stories that they tell. And of course, all of the gods are a bit different, and all of the individual stories are a bit different. But if you just zoom out and look at the overall picture, it's super, super similar. And that's fascinating for those of us who are trying to pick apart the lore and try to figure out why things are the way that they are. So looking at Nehekhara, some outside as well as all the cool details we're about to drill into, because my goodness, Setra's got some pretty damn awesome ones.
Yes, he does.
He's super cool. It's well worth doing because we are talking about a character who has started 2,500 years before Sigmar's around and will be there right till the freaking end.
Yeah, and two things to really add on to that to really drive home is that, yeah, Setra begins his reign and like unifies Nehekhara really around 2,500 years before Sigmar. But you have to remember that Nehek, who united like the original Nehekhara, was hundreds of years before that. Like he's already a legend by that point, which means Nehekhara, like Andy says, probably been around since about 3,000 years before. That's
at least.
That's before the Sundering. Like that's how old this human nation is. It is crazy old. And I will say I do appreciate very much that the old world lore goes out of its way to enshrine Nehekhara as the first and greatest human civilization that is purely human. No dwarves, no elves, just Nehekharans, just guys. And then the last thing is that the whole note about the Nehekharan gods is super freaking interesting in that the thing about Nehekharan myth that's so bizarre is that a lot of people, when you hear what Andy just said, you may think to yourself, oh, clearly they're talking about when like chaos showed up and like there were demons everywhere, that the Nehekharan gods walked out and fought and did all this stuff. But in some of the stories, no, it's before that. Like there was an age of darkness that the Nehekharans talk about that then Thra, the sun god, and all of his pantheon showed up, and they ruled over what we know as Nehekhara and lived there physically for a long time. And then there was a big war that brought out between the demons. So like there was a whole nother epoch in there that's not accounted for. And it's a really interesting mythology that the Nehekarans have kind of built up. And just the Nehekaran gods, we'll talk about them more later. They're super weird and super fun because they're kind of this weird fusion of almost like, oh, are they like a human interpretation of the old ones, or are they a human interpretation of the elven gods? And they're kind of both, which is really interesting. But we'll talk more about them later. But so let's get caught up on some super chat goodies here.
I'll bring it up for you there.
Yes, very excited for the stream. You guys, what do we think of the Cubicle 7 announcement that there's going to be an old world tabletop RPG game? I wonder if more background lore will be fleshed out in it. It's a really interesting announcement. I'm excited, but I honestly don't know what to think, to be honest. I'm curious what the system will be, because it would feel silly to just make it 4th edition, but in a different time. I feel like it might be more exciting to make it a genuinely different system. But I'm honestly shocked that Games Workshop gave the go ahead on that, considering I don't think there's a Horus Heresy RPG game. I think it's just 40K, right?
Well, 40K's always had multiple role-playing games. I mean, it's got a couple of them right now, both of which are handled by Cubicle 7. And back when it was handled by Fantasy Flight Games, there was also multiple games for 40K. So the idea of multiple games for the same setting isn't entirely new, particularly they're tackling different things. The big one here is that really all we have is a different timeline. So it's, I think, a really good opportunity to effectively make a 5th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and streamline everything out and hopefully not carry the baggage that Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay carries. Because Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is a game that has a strong and long legacy that was really badly, let's say, attacked by the 3rd edition of the game because it went so different in direction to the 1st and the 2nd edition, and the fans rebelled in some places and others were upset. So I think given it's got a completely different name, it's a completely different position, they could actually go to town with this and create something interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like they'll really be able to tell a story just their own and explore some really fun places. Especially because like I really hope we get a Border Prince book. Because the Border Princes are so central to what's going on at the start of Old World. Border Prince book would be super fun.
Although whenever someone brings up the Border Princes, I will say every single time they've got the Cyprian Road on their Border Prince map, but they don't have Kypris, which is where the Cyprian Road is named. Oh my goodness! But yes, I think that would be super fun. Because the previous Border Princes book, which came out for the 2nd edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, wasn't about the Border Princes. It was about creating your own Border Prince kingdom. So it had very little actual detail. And I think that obviously the old world starting there, it's going to be adding a lot of detail. One of the great joys of role-playing games is they do what battle games can't. They provide what it's like to live there, what actual a day-to-day business is like, so that the GM can then portray it. So you get a wealth of really fascinating extra facts. So here's to hoping that all happens.
The magic system is probably going to be super interesting because there's no colleges of magic. So it's going to be pre-8 wins.
And elven dominance of magic, as it's understood by many of the realms in the old world, just hasn't happened yet. So we've got all manner of witches and craziness, or we have something else. It depends on what the old world eventually pins it down onto.
Yeah, moving on. Anthony, finally caught a live stream again. Also, question: will Spotify podcast be updated with recent streams from December? Yes. Let me just put a note on that. I have all the ones that we did on my channel up.
Let me just sort that out. I got L over December.
Yeah,
really L.
I will get them up soon. Yep.
Yeah. So I'll mark that now.
Cole Patterson, and Herodotus' writing, there is a, sorry if I mispronounced that, there's a tale of the pharaoh Sesostris, who is said to have conquered as far as Ethiopia, Thrace, Scythia, modern Ukraine, and Arabia. Could this story have inspired Setra?
Yes.
Probably. That seems very likely, also considering that doesn't seem terribly far from Setra.
Yeah.
And like
I always thought that it did. I'm not sure if it did because I didn't write or speak to the writers about this one specifically, but yeah, I always thought it did.
Thank you, Morton Crescent. They're just these guys, those Nehekarans.
You know,
they're just normal men. Necroplayer, except for the episode, mine briefly talking about how Setra's. Oh, okay, this is actually a fun thing. Mine talking about how Setra's character has evolved over editions. So honestly, the funny thing about Setra is despite the fact that he was initially introduced super long time ago, like 3rd edition, 4th edition, he's old. Back when they were just undead legions. Like you just had undead. There was no like Tomb Kings kind of sort of existed, but there wasn't like the separation until way later. And Setra has been around that entire time and was just kind of a scary big bad world conqueror.
I mean, he has evolved significantly. Back when he was introduced in the 4th edition of the game for the Undead Army list, Setra was given a little bit of history. He was dropped in as a special character, and he wasn't all that. He was just the Tomb King of Tomb Kings who was raised by Nagash's magic. So this will change significantly in terms of how it eventually reveals itself. As Nagash got defeated by Alcadazar, Setra then went about taking on all the other Tomb Kings and rose above them. This story would be massively inflated over the course of the editions. To begin with, he's just someone that Nagash brought back who kicks in all the rest of them. Later on, oh my goodness, Setra is something significantly bigger, as we'll go on to say. So basically, as is often the case between the editions, what has happened is they've gone, hey, somebody wrote an 8. I'm now going to add +3 to that. It's now 11. Turn everything up to 11. Oh, hell yes. Every single last special character just has that little extra dial push. And Setra in particular is a character who didn't just have dial push put on him. He also had significant lore push as he became effectively responsible for much of what the Warhammer world would eventually become. Just as a small detail here, note the idea of the King of Kings from Khemri. Note the idea of separate city-states. This is something that becomes reproduced by different groups across the old world again and again. Sigmar repeated this. There's many suggestions that the peoples of the Empire, several of them came across the World's Edge Mountains. Some of them were probably of Nehekharan stock originally. And one of them in particular, the Ostermarkers, worship a god of death almost more exclusively than any other. And again, there's that strong possibility that they themselves carry old blood from Nehekhara. But old traditions from Nehekhara have popped up in the Empire of all places, in Pretoria with its king over all of its dukes. Basic traditions that were put in place by the Nehekharans a long time ago are reproduced by other human states and indeed others. But you get that feeling that it was given to them because the dwarves do the same things. The elves do the same things. It's almost as if the old ones had a plan.
Matthew Lowry, love the lore for fantasy. Thank you both. Andy, LAWhammer vids have been giving some of the only serotonin I have had while finishing up my master's degree. Sotek, you kill and you nerd out on lore proper. You don't tell people what to do in my personal time. The police can't find out. But thank you. We really appreciate that. I'm really glad you're enjoying LAWhammer. It's an awesome show. And then Cole Patterson, well, Setra's name is probably just Set plus Raw, right? That is also very likely the case.
Almost certainly.
That feels like Games Workshop level creativity right there.
Ouch.
Yeah. When it comes to names, it's like if it's not a pun, it's gonna be something. Just take two ideas and slap them together. It'll be fine.
So true.
So now talking about Setra himself, actually getting into the man's story, even though calling him just a man, as you will find out when we get through this, genuinely feels like an understatement. So Setra was born into a really interesting time. He was born like somewhere in the late, very, very late, I guess you would call them the minus 2600s. But the thing about, or I guess the early 20, it doesn't matter. Setra, when Setra was born, Nehekhara was in a really bad place. After Nehek had united the nation, for a while, they were doing pretty good about listening to whoever was in Khemri or whoever just kind of happened to be the most dominant king. And all of the city-states were expanding outwards. Because they weren't called tomb cities, obviously, because they were not places of death by any stretch of the imagination. They were very, very different. Like the Nehekharans pre-Setra were very different people. They were they lived life in a very harsh desert, though a lot of the plains were beautiful, wonderful places. They had a lot more greenery, and a lot of life, especially surrounding the rivers. They had a lot of nomadic desert tribes they worked with, but for the most part, they were much more. They had a much more balanced view on life and the relationship between life and death.
They were chill. They had their gods. They had a land that was bountiful in extremis. They were in a really good place. But they had kind of fallen apart for a variety of different reasons, and the politics were dark.
Yeah, they expanded, and then some of them had either overexpanded, which led to invaders, and of course led to a situation of Nehekhara doing what all humans do, which is that when they all got really big, some of the cities, they started looking over at their neighbors and going, he's not able to defend all that land. I bet we could take some of his stuff. And they start infighting. Civil war. Big civil war that lasts for a really long time. Decades. Amongst the civil war, this, of course, weakens Nehekhara's outer defenses, so they start getting invaded. Greenskins start coming in. There's a mention that a lizardman army comes up on the eastern side of the World's Edge Mountains and smashes Liberus and Marak. Like, they're having a really bad time over there. There are savage Northmen coming all the way down from the far north or sailing across the seas and are attacking them. There's mentions of mutants and some of them trying to summon demons, and it's a bad time. There are bandits coming in. Some of the kingdoms are just falling to lawlessness, and people are doing desperate things in desperate times. And then, to make matters worse, a drought comes in. And the Great Vitae River starts to basically just dry up, and there's no rain season for years. And the Nehekharans begin to fear that the gods abandoned them. And to make things even worse, then a plague comes in. So it's like the end of days for Nehekhara at this point.
And it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. And there's a couple of things that's worth adding. We've already loosely touched upon the gods, and I'll loosely mention them again. They're not here now. They're very much elsewhere. The time of the gods has passed. So appealing to them is apparently, at least so far, not making the difference that it should do. On top of that as well, the classic answer to most of these problems for any of you that know your Warhammer lore is to say, well, let's just get a wizard in and cast some spells. That'll sort it. But at this point, the Nehekharans were not using magic, at least in any way as they understand it. They particularly weren't using the winds of magic. Now, there's multiple reasons for that, but the primary one is they're really quite far away from the poles. And the further away you are from the poles, the less magic there is sitting directly in front of you. Plus, we're at the beginning of the... Well, really, we're at the beginning of the Warhammer world in its modern phase, post the great wars against chaos, and the elven sucking out of magic with that great tempest of swirly vortex over Ulthuan has, at this moment, done its job exceedingly well. So not only are they further from the poles, but the vortex is at its strongest. It is sucking magic from the world, and it's yet to be corrupted. So magic, for all it is definitely there, it is present, is not part of their common vocabulary as of yet. That is something that will come later.
Yes. So that's the situation of that shit's kind of hitting the fan. And there's a note that if the tomb cities could set aside their differences and they could all bandy up together in the classic human sense, they would probably stand a reasonable chance of pushing out the invaders. Because, like, we're not talking about just little roving bands. Like, there's like a war going on. There is a chaos invasion going on. It's very, very, very bad. Like, it's a really shit scenario. But the thing about the Nehekharans is they are so arrogant and they're so stubborn at this point, which, you know, is kind of just classic humans, that they still refuse to put aside their differences. The kings of the various cities still want to be in charge, and they are not willing to work together unless that individual is acknowledged as the top king, which nobody's willing to do that. And they're too weak to attack one another. They're barely managing to defend their cities as is. So it's just kind of a stalemate, and they're just sort of rotting away.
Basically, it's Warhammer with a stress on the war.
Yeah. And into this comes Setra. Now, what we know about Setra before he becomes king is very, very little. But what we do know is that he was an extremely powerful prince, and he was the firstborn son of his father, which is something that will become important later because Setra changes how things work when it comes to firstborns later. But for Setra, he's the firstborn son. We don't know what his dad's name is, but he was the first prince, and he was a terrifying general. By the time he was in his, he was 18 or like in his early 20s when he takes over. He had already fought in several wars. He was an incredible warrior. And the big thing is that although he himself was an absolutely horrifying fighter, the thing he's really, really famous for is his tactical prowess. Setra is a genius level general. He's ruthless and he's just cruel. Like Setra, one thing to get out of the way really early, Setra is not a good person. He's not like, we've kind of talked about how there are some characters in the Warhammer world who are seen as quote unquote evil, but you can kind of argue that, the way their race views the world, yada, yada, yada. No, Setra's just a bad guy because he goes by human standards and he is evil as shit. He is incredibly selfish.
Yeah, he's prideful, he's arrogant, but he is also exceedingly cunning, wise, and intelligent. And one thing that he realizes very early is that if he can secure the support of the priesthood, he will be significantly benefited, because it could also secure the support of the gods, or more importantly, secure the support of the people as well. So one of the things that he does right from the very beginning is strengthen that particular relationship, particularly because the priesthood, as it currently stands, of all the gods, are claiming that all the strife and all the woe is a curse from the gods for their pride. So, of course, the most prideful of them all comes in and says, well, of course, their pride is the problem. I can fix this shit, and I will do it the way the gods want, and is significantly influenced by the gods themselves in terms of how he presents himself to the people. But let's make it as clear as was made there. Setra is not the good guy here. Setra is someone who has overwhelming desire to rule, and as will become clear as he grows older, he has an enormous rage, a temper quite unlike any other, and is not the sort of person you want to say no to.
Yeah. So when Setra takes over as king and he's looking out, like Andy said, he immediately seizes on a really clever idea that the priesthoods of Nehekhara had a very strong cultural significance, and they played their role, but they were not weaponized the way Setra did. Setra looked at them and said, I can't just be a king among men. I need to be a king acknowledged by gods. So he comes up with an idea of, he gathers the priesthoods together and he goes, I want the gods' attention. How do I do this? And they say, well, we make offerings and we make sacrifices. And Setra goes, okay, we're going to hold a big ritual. And on the first year, the first anniversary of his coronation, Setra gathers together the people of Khemri and says, we're going to do a great ritual. And to humble himself before the gods and to make his devotion, so to speak, evidently clear, Setra very specifically pulls all of his family together, all of his own children that he's had with his wives and concubines, and he ritually sacrifices his entire bloodline. He murders his whole family gives them to the gods. And they wait, and very, very quickly, the skies grow dark, clouds roll in, and it begins to rain. And for the first time in living memory, in many decades, it pours rain, and the Great Vitae River floods. It floods its banks, which washes into Khemri. It washes away the disease. It washes away the rot and decay. And the harvest is greater than it's ever been before. And everyone, the priesthood, the people, the other nobles, turn to Setra and go, he is acknowledged by the gods. He is no king. He is a priest king.
Now, this is huge. Now, we know as a character, he's enormously prideful. He's enormously intelligent. It is very easy for us to look at those facts and say, are they real? And to answer, probably not. In that, it would be very easy to say that Setra manipulated the people and did this great act to effectively secure his rule by wiping out anyone who might perhaps come to challenge him later by taking out all of his own children. And then, upon his first year's coronation, secures himself in such an absolutely unassailable position with the entire priesthood behind him, with the entire populace behind him because they saved him. He is now the center of everybody's life in the local area. Everybody worships him effectively, almost as a god king himself. And this is when he's maybe just a teenager. He's someone who has done something significant. There's another reading. He is literally blessed by the gods. And that is possibly also true. But if that's true, then those gods are pretty malevolent, because Setra is the opposite of a good guy. He is not a nice, peaceful king who's going to rule over everyone in a just and fair way. Now, I'm not going to say his rule doesn't bring many benefits. In fact, as we will go on to, they certainly do. But there is certainly many readings that you can make when you look at Setra's background, because his first initial steps as he makes his, let's say, initial forays as a king are enormously decisive. He secures his rule in a way that is so absolute. There is nobody left to challenge him. No one. And no one would dare challenge him, because he has brought about prosperity for everyone. Whatever he did, whether it was divine, whether it was magical, whether it was a completely different source, because as we'll go on to, he is the sort that certain people will whisper to when the dark times come.
Yes. So, I want to catch up on super chats and stuff real quick. Aaron, what's up, nerds? Thank you, fellow nerd. Appreciate it. They're not
super
here.
Appreciated.
They're elsewhere. Andy Law 2024.
Andy La.
Mendatis Callum saying, and there also be the Talanes in their city states, and the Tomb Kings have tombs in that same land. Oh, we'll get into everywhere Setra fingers down.
And I think that's a really good point just to dwell on for a moment, that the influence of the Tomb Kings beyond just their legacy, because they went everywhere, as we'll go on to describe, and they left their culture everywhere they went.
Yep, Jonathan Scott. So whenever Setra is killed and regenerating, what is his spirit doing? So we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but the does he have an Egyptian style spirit kingdom? So in the lore, the realm of souls is actually expanded upon a bit, in that there is several like tiers to it, and at the top tier for the kings and the big nobles and awesome, which fascinatingly is not necessarily people who were good in life. It's the people who followed the laws set down by the desert gods, who were often royal. Because supposedly Usirian like weighs your soul to see how blemished it is, but Setra gets the top billing, and Setra is a
well
monster.
done.
Yeah. So clearly Usirian is using an interesting system to weigh people's souls, but Setra literally kind of hangs out in like the best way I can describe it is it's what's the Roman afterlife, the like golden fields or whatever. Elysium. Yeah, it's described very similar to Elysium.
Yeah, I think if you wish to view Setra as divine, you could argue that very early on he realized that mortal life means very little to the gods at all, in the slightest. What matters is the overall outcome, because one thing, as we will go on to describe, is that Setra is enormously successful.
Yep. Istian, thanks both of you for these awesome streams. I just finished my second session with my Ubersreich 7. These sessions have become my primary source for building the knowledge and emotions I want to impart. Hey, that's awesome. I really appreciate that. Awesome.
Superb. Delighted you're enjoying yourself.
Schwartz, think Setra and the Great Kurgan lived in the same time period. If so, how did they react to each other? The Great Kurgan, when he happened, total fucking toss up. There are thousands and thousands of years he could have shown up during. Yep. I highly doubt him and Setra were in the same time period, because they, that Forge World, he's a cool character that Forge World book came up with, and then he like never gets talked again ever again. So unfortunately, we don't really have a lot of reference material for him. But if they had met, it literally would have been like if you put Setra and Nagash in a room together. They would have hated each other and they would have tried to kill each other. Yeah. And that's all really there is to it. Is Setra the Warhammer version of DBZ abridged Vegeta? Yes. Mendatus Calum, teenager sacrifices his entire bloodline at the start of his rule. Khemrian gods stop and reach for the spigot.
We're listening.
Yeah. There's several tier to it. Ryan of Sotek. Anywho, tier to it. So Setra has now taken over. He's the first priest king. And one of the things he gets immediately as kind of like a sign of the priesthood gets put in a really interesting position by what Setra does. Because we don't actually get to see their reaction, but it's fair to say there were probably a lot within the priesthoods who realized that Setra was a significant threat to what power they did have, and B, had basically just co-opted their entire religion. And declaring himself as a priest king means he's now above them, not only legally, but religiously, which is really, that's a huge fucking deal. I mean, that would literally be like the emperor, like that'd be like Karl Franz walking out being like, no, the Grand Theogonists, nobody. I'm in charge. I'm the head of the church now. Which is a significant deal. Especially when that had not been the case for, all of tradition and centuries before that. They were separate entities. But and by this point, Setra to the people of Khemri is known for his brutality. It's not a secret. It wasn't like he suddenly was a tyrant. He was tyrannical as a prince, and he became worse as a king.
Yep.
And the cults decide to give him a gift to show that they have his back, they're behind him, and more importantly, to make sure they don't get executed for not properly kneeling to him. Because the thing about Setra is he would have turned to them and said, the gods back me up, which means you're going to back me up, and I want you to demonstrate your loyalty to me. So they do. And what they make for Setra is a grand device we know as the Chariot of the Gods. And it is his big golden regal chariot that, to be fair, is blessed to hell and back. That thing, I can't imagine what sacrifices those priests made and what they pulled out all the stops to imbue it with the power of every single member of the Nehekharan pantheon, of which there are a lot. And it shows the chariot is obscenely powerful. It has wheels that are literally constantly on fire forever, like ensorcelled blue flames.
It's pretty much the a representation of said chariot that tore across the heavens with a god riding in it.
Yes, which there are quite a few mentions of. There being some kind of godly entity that rides a flaming chariot through the sky.
Indeed, Petra.
And so yep, and even the Lizardmen have mention of an old one who rode a flaming chariot through the sky, which was Tluxla, which is very interesting. But in any event,
it is.
So Setra gets this chariot and he mounts up, and the old world actually does some really cool expansion on the early part of Setra's reign, where the next thing he does is he drills the living shit out of the armies of Khemri. Where he comes up with several new forms of warfare. He comes up with several new tactical styles that actually let you run some really cool units in his special roster. And it talks about that he comes up with a training regimen and he forces everyone in his military to go through these regimens and practice and practice and practice and practice and practice. And if you trip, if you fall, if you make a mistake, you are killed. The only exception were charioteers. If they messed up, they were only beaten.
You can almost feel some of the Roman influence on some of the writing there, and I like it a lot because it really does enhance his character. While we're here, though, let's bring up a couple of extras.
The only head of the church is this hammer.
100% true. And Commander Bond, question: is there any connection between Setra and Alcatazar? Heard that the latter is descended from him. Anyone can confirm this?
So there are a lot of rumors about who are descendants of Setra, because it's worth noting Setra almost assuredly had children after his big ritual. Though we'll talk about what Setra does to lineages in a minute. But Setra had a ton of kids, a ton. A lot of people are descended from him. There are rumors and myths that Nagash is a direct descendant of his, which is actually very likely.
It's not just likely, it's almost certain, isn't it?
Yeah, and Alcatazar is very heavily flat out said to be a descendant of Nagash. So it is extremely likely that Setra is the progenitor of pretty much all of the really famous Khemrian characters, which, I mean, that makes sense.
If you're going to put money on it, the answer is almost certainly yes. And indeed, given his position and the power that he wielded, and most importantly, his extreme arrogance, the idea of all of these children kicking around all over the place as he grew older, it's another form of immortality. It's almost certainly going to be the case. And given how early this empire is, I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of just people, not just important folks, what we know, but just people in general, probably carry a small amount of Setra's blood. That'll be right up through the empire, that'll be through Bretonia, because his people were there right at the beginning, and as the various tribes, as they were often called, moved north and separated from the south, large chunks of them will have come from the lands of what is now known as Khemri. So, not Khemri, pardon me, the land of the dead. So there is all manner of cool potentials for what that means. Hell, you could even claim that maybe even Sigmar himself is potentially a descendant of Setra. And that makes for some really fun, interesting stories, particularly if you're wanting to dive into some deep, fun Nagash-style lore and how Nehekhara is pretty much connected to everything.
Yep. So, now that Setra has secured the power of the gods behind him, he has an army that is so horrifically well-trained and battle-hardened, and to them, Setra is basically a god. He's not a simple king. He is a living representative of the gods of Nehekhara. He has the full backing of the Pantheon. He rides a magic chariot that's constantly burning and from their perspective is nigh indestructible. And he starts gathering more artifacts from the priesthoods. The final things that he gets before he goes on his big epic conquest is his last two, like really, obviously he has his crown, but he gets two big gifts from the two most important sides of the Nehekharan pantheon, which is Petra, who's the great father, and also the sun god, and Usirian, the god of the underworld, who is important, but is going to become much more important in a little while. And from the cult of Usirian, he is gifted the Scarab Brooch of Usirian, which is an artifact that basically it's hard to describe how powerful this artifact is because it's genuinely frightening, but it seems to quite literally make Usirian aware of Setra's existence, and he is warded against magic by a god to the extent that even the likes of Nagash, as we'll talk about later, cannot hurt him with magic, which is bonkers.
That's proper brutal. It's brilliant.
Bonkers.
I've got a little brooch. Boom!
We will talk a little bit. There's a reason why Usirian likes Setra so much, but we'll get into that later. And then Petra, of course, they give to Setra his legendary blade, which is a khopesh that literally, it's a big two-handed khopesh that has the power of the sun imbued into it. So it burns with the heat of the sun. It's got like a white hot edge that burns so hot that it blinds people that look at it, which is awesome. So anyway, Setra being very inspired by legends of his own homeland, basically does a repeat of Nehek. He goes to all of the priest cities and he walks up to them he rides up to them with his armies and he says, "Hey, you bow to me or I'm going to come in there and I'm going to kick your ass." And he goes to Numas and Numas tells him, "Haha, no." So he goes in and he kicks their asses. And he just goes around to each of the cities and tells them to either serve him or die. And he has a very successful campaign. Everyone he goes up against, the first couple try to defy him and it doesn't go well. Pretty much everyone else he forcefully conquers. Now, what's interesting is that Setra doesn't, in most stories, or in the newer lore we have, he doesn't end up going through the Valley of Kings and taking over Morocco and those other guys. He comes to kind of more of an understanding because King Far, way over there on the other side of the pass, is strong enough to resist Setra because he has this giant valley that he's able to fortify and make it impossible for Setra to get over to him. But they kind of come to a bit of a mutual understanding of like, all right, I'm not going to mess with you and you're not going to mess with me. That is, of course, until King Far dies of old age. And then his children immediately bow their heads to Setra because they're like, nope, we're not doing this.
Basically, no, sorry, no.
No, go ahead.
To cut that all down, Setra is the conqueror, much like Nehekhara before, of Nehekhara. And his rule is brutal, efficient, and quite extraordinary. If you go against him, you die. If you go with him, you prosper. So the big part of his entire rule is that he's actually an extremely competent, horrendous, autocratic, terrible, despotic, marvelously competent king. If you look at him from just the outside and imagine them as tiny little ants moving around and not actual people, things running around doing jobs, then if you look at it from there, the entirety of Nehekhara flourishes. It suddenly returns to what it was before. A new golden age returns, like Nehek himself had been reborn. The gods are clearly with him, and if you imagine the gods as viewing humans as mere ants, or if you wish to use such a metaphor, you could perhaps argue for a good reason why this figure, who is quite frankly awful, he is a terrible person if you're viewing morality by any classical standard, could be seen as not just a good king, but the greatest king for everything that he succeeds to do. Unfortunately, because of his very character, the conquering of Nehekhara just simply isn't enough.
Yeah. So Nehek conquered Nehekhara and stopped. Because that was enough.
So we do a couple of the things before so we don't fall behind there. They've got a nice, quick, easy one there.
This was pitched for Disney Plus. Setra met Kang. Yeah, Setra would win, is what would happen. Because he's Setra. Oh my gosh, I love that.
In my hand.
The power of the sun. When I hear Setra is Warhammer Doctor Doom, pretty much all of your favorite villains you'll kind of see in Setra.
Yeah, Setra manifests many of them in different ways, but I think that's not a bad analogy.
Yeah, he's about to get a lot worse. Keep in mind at this point, Setra is in his 20s and 30s.
Yep,
when he
is.
Late 20s, early 30s. From here, he conquers the world, essentially. Setra he pushes out all the invaders. He leads a very successful conquest against several orc was, completely obliterates them. He then goes up against the various chaos forces, tears them to pieces. He pushes any Lijman forces all the way back into the jungles, and he sets up his empire for the next big stage, which is that he successfully conquers all the way west until he basically reaches the Vulture Mountains. He conquers all the way south until he gets to the edge of the jungles. He takes over now with King Far dead. He claims all the way over to the Sour Sea. Then he goes north into the Badlands.
What will become the Sour Sea? It's not sour.
Yeah, it's not the Sour Sea yet.
It's a lovely place.
Yeah. He conquers north into the Badlands, and then he goes further north into what we know
right into the Border Princes.
And then he goes further north into, according to some,
not quite, because it's at that point in his 40s that he has his big revelation. Because it's as he reaches the vaults, as he reaches Blackfire Pass, effectively, where one day Sigmar will kick every known orc that exists from one part of the empire into elsewhere. Setra crosses what he thinks is the great boundary that will lead him to the north, that will lead him to the source of the great chaos hordes. And he finds himself not at the north, at the extreme. He finds himself with another vast, massive, unconquered land. And he stops because he's now in his 40s and he's feeling his age. Now, as a man who's in his 40s, I totally get this. Today's stream was a stream where I was like, oh my goodness, I feel so ill. Am I going to do it? And I was like, God damn straight I am. Because if Setra can, so can I, God damn it. And he arrives up there. He looks out across the Great Reich Basin and the enormity of the forest there. Now, it's very easy for us to think, oh, he just arrived at like the great forests of Germany and went, oh, that's a pretty big forest. Well, it didn't stop Rome. They kept going. No, stop thinking of the Warhammer world like the real world. It isn't. It's a far bigger place. way bigger. And he had just fought himself through realm after realm after realm, through all manner of awfulness, and lying beyond, there was more. And so much more. It's really fascinating to think about what was there, because according to various books, basic tribes of humanity kicking around, but was there more? Because this gives him pause for two reasons. Number one, there is so much more. There is so much more that he has to conquer. Can he do it? And two, there is a lot there. It's going to take time. And his crushing mortality hits him. The feeling that his body is not going to last for this. He's still strong. He's still very strong. He still glides on that chariot like a freaking god, but he knows his time is short, and he feels in every last bone of his body just how short it's going to be. And if he's going to fulfill what is his dream, to conquer everything, because who else should? He's fucking Setra after all. He can't do this. Well, he's just not happy. So he sets someone else to trying to figure this shit out.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that Setra, this is his midlife crisis, quite literally. And he gets, like, he rages on that mountain. When he looks over the Black Mountains, you might think, oh, he's like, oh yeah, more to conquer. No, he is furious that the world is bigger than he thought it was. Because, like Andy said, he doesn't have enough time. Like, he wants everything. Like, he wants global domination.
Death is robbing him of what is his fucking right. Sweary
the only enemy he can't stab.
Exactly. And it's wrong. And everything in his body is burning with the desire. And you could easily just say to conquer, to control, to rule. But in many respects, it's to bring Setra's peace, to bring the world underneath the only person that can properly rule it and kick out things like chaos, destroy things like the Greenskins. No one is like Setra. No one in the world is better than him. No one ever will be better than him. His pride is a pinnacle, a mountain that no one else can ever climb. There is nobody like him. And he realizes that he's going to die because he's not going to be able to get this all done. And that sucks.
Yep. So Setra goes home. He basically ends his boundary for now at the Black Mountains, and he runs back to Khemri, and he calls every single priest from every cult to him, and he sits them all down. He says, I must not die. Figure it out, or I'm going to kill all of you. And they go, oh shit, okay. And he founds the Mortuary Cult, which I think a lot of people think that the Mortuary Cult existed beforehand or that it formed naturally. No, Setra quite literally took all of the religion, like, so you're looking at like a polytheistic society. He forced all of them together and said, no, you are one group now, and your job is to figure out how to make me live forever. And if you fail, not only am I going to kill you, I will damn you eternally. Bet on it.
And I'll die, which, as far as he's concerned, a horror that everybody should be afraid of, because he's the only thing that matters.
Yes. And the Mortuary Cult, to their credit, are scared pretty shitless. And they take this charge incredibly seriously and immediately set out in every cardinal direction you could imagine, trying to find answers. They start binding desert spirits. They start binding demons. They start breaking open anything they could find regarding ancient lore, and they begin to build as much knowledge, not just about the gods and the incantations and things they had relied on before then, but genuine magic, and trying to master it without the help of any elves or Slann or anyone that actually knows how it works. They are trying to force their own development of magical knowledge.
And this entire period of time is actually fascinating because the agents of Setra go across the world, and there is nowhere they don't visit. They cross the oceans. They go to every dark passage. They go into every nook and every cranny. They interview every single species that's willing to countenance them. And those that aren't, they terrorize until they get what they want from them. I find it interesting, just again, to try and look at it from the outside and take a little moment to consider what actually has happened. He's reached the old world in truth, and as many view it, because many view the empire that will come some couple of thousand years or so as the heart of the old world. And as we all know, the heart of the old world is in many respects the heart of magic in the old world as well, in many different ways. And it's fascinating that it's that at this point, as he crosses that boundary, he becomes obsessed with, and his people become obsessed with, learning all of the magics of the world in order to extend their lives. And the best bit about all of this is, contrary to what everyone would expect from these typical stories, they don't just succeed. They succeed really, really well. We often think of the dwarves or the elves as the true masters of whatever particular trade they put themselves to. Elves are effectively immortal. Dwarves, the great artisans, they don't. No. Humanity here goes from being a short-lived species to knowing more than enough to extend their life, as it turns out, for not just decades, but centuries.
Yeah. Want to catch up real quick on some super chat goodies. Setra isn't the king Khemri wants, but the king Khemri needs.
Yeah.
Setra versus Tamarkan would be epic. Who's with me? Honestly, you may not believe me. Tamarkan, I would get his shit pushed in pretty hard. Yeah. It'd be a great fight. It would be a great fight, but Setra would. Setra is really, really scary. Would Setra's reign line up with the aftermath of the War of the Beard to explain? No, Setra was. We'll get into it a little later. Setra's dead way before the War of the Beard starts. The War of the Beard is more right. Is like starts right before Nagash is born, or the events leading up to it are around Nagash's time, which is centuries after Setra. But what is worth noting is that you have to keep in mind that Setra is very conveniently placed where the elves have a lot of colonies going on. And the elves are also like, this is post sundering, not by a lot though. It's only like a couple hundred years after the sundering happened. So the elves are in kind of a place in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's worth noting a couple of facts here, particularly if we're going to just briefly discuss the elves, because the elves are something that we should consider, because they have an empire upon which the sun never sets at this particular point. It spans the world. It is everywhere. And surely it will have contact with Setra, this great expanding force. And the answer is yes. And we have proof of this with various events that happen later. And interestingly, whom Setra allies with, because repeated times, Setra will go to war with the Dark Elves, which I think is a super fascinating thing, particularly when you consider where the Dark Elves end up. Multiple times they make raids into the old world together as a combined force. So there's a fascinating tale there that almost certainly needs to be expanded upon, because Setra is a unique individual who does not take allies easily. So it speaks to an older alliance or an older contact that I think would definitely be super fun to explore out and figure out exactly what happened back then.
Yeah, and there is a lot of heavy indication that Setra was trading with the High Elves and with like Alexandria. There's like a whole thing about
elves.
Yeah, elves.
Yeah, elves. Yeah.
But he also traded with the dwarfs. A lot and the lands that Setra wanted were not like Setra didn't really care for like crossing the World's Edge Mountains because he literally kind of treated them as the edge of the world. He did expand up into the Darklands after his, which we'll get into in a second, but he didn't really want the mountains themselves because they were not really settled. They weren't great for the empire he was building at the time. I'm sure he was eyeing the dwarves in the long term. But he was happy to trade with them and get precious gold and gems and materials. Because if you look at all the materials that Khemri has, they likely had a pretty lucrative relationship with the dwarfs, especially because they were a breadbasket. And if there's things dwarfs are happy to trade for, to be frank, it's food.
Yeah. At the moment, really think of if you want to go down the old alliance scheme, he's kind of lawful evil. Which means that he's, in many respects, he's up for trade, he's up for working with people, he's up for doing whatever needs to be done. His empire, as it expands, it goes through other human empires, other human peoples, and it goes through any who dare oppose him, which is quite different to arriving at, say, for example, a large dwarf hold, which is, at this point, probably quite technologically capable anyway. But you arrive at your old dwarf hold, and the old dwarves are like, yeah, who are you? Yeah, great, let's trade. There is no reason to conquer them at this point when he's got those who are literally trying to war against him, greenskins, for example, as he moves through lands that the greenskins hold. They are his focus because they're the ones that are a threat to him. The dwarves are not a threat to him at all in the slightest. To attack them is to open himself to attack from them. And he is really far from an idiot. Really far. You could argue in many respects that he is, for all he's the worst bad guy in many respects, he's also the ultimate good guy in terms of bringing peace, bringing prosperity, and calming everything the shit down. Where beforehand it was war, disease, pestilence. It almost feels like one of the great incursions of chaos happening again. Setra, almost like he's a champion of light, but the most darkest one you ever saw is bringing peace everywhere that he goes. And when he encounters peace from another species and it's not threatening him, he moves on. He's got bigger fish to fry. So yeah, they almost certainly were in contact a lot because they're in the same parts of the world.
Commander Bo, Setra seeing the mess after Nagash's great kill. Everything smells like Troy from Community entering the flat with pizza and seeing the mess there. Not completely dissimilar, yeah. It's more like a nuclear bomb went off as opposed to everything's just on fire, but yeah.
Yeah, that's coming.
Pyro Mecco just got the Old World Ravening Horse book. It says Tomb Kings can ride horses. I know you've repeatedly said it's religion. I have lots of trouble finding the source for that. I have to go sit down and actually look at the Ravening Horse book. But in 8th edition, they did not give you the option to ride horses with your Tomb Kings and Tomb Princes only. There's a note in the chariot section that just talks about that, why the Nehekharans don't do that. And it's because of the way they view horses, which were a very recent thing for them. Like humanity taming horses was a fairly new phenomena at that point. So the Tomb Kings were like, those are like dirty creatures of the earth. I'm not touching those things. It's very likely new books have changed that. That's fine. Lore changes and adapts.
It's going to happen.
Sean Saltz, is Khemri just the British Empire?
No, not really. It's a much older empire. I would look to the older empires if you want. If you want to see British Empire made manifest the Warhammer world, the High Elves are far closer to that. And what becomes of them?
Abysmal, a little off topic. When do Katep and constructs fit in? Later. That's more around Nagash's era, less Setra's era. Which we'll talk about here more specifically in a moment. Setra is the perfect example of the white-black color combinations from Magic the Gathering. I appreciate you putting it in Magic terms for those that need that. that helps visualize it for some people. I appreciate that.
It does.
So Setra, as we said, returns to Khemri. He's 40 years old. He founds the Mortuary Cult, and to make the Mortuary Cult exceedingly powerful, Setra needs everyone in Nehekhara to invest in the Mortuary Cult for his own benefit. So he changes the laws for the first big thing he does, which, if you really think about it, is insane. Like, imagine this trying to happen in the Empire. Setra sends out a missive to all of the cities, and he tells them, okay, our religion has been restructured so that all of the cults are now under the Mortuary Cult. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, all of your firstborn sons or children, whatever it may be, your firstborn sons and daughters, actually, I think it's sons specifically, because the Mortuary Cult was like, actually had some really interesting views on sex, which plays later into Neferata shenanigans. But he tells all of your firstborn sons must be given to the Mortuary Cult. They will forfeit all titles. They will forfeit anything that has to do with royalty. They belong to the cult. They will be raised by the cult. They will be educated by them. All of your firstborn sons belong to me, and their job is to make sure I don't die. Which, like, holy Setra. Shit, how that did not destabilize an empire goes to show how scary he is and respected honestly, in a lot of ways.
And feared.
Yeah. So
Oh, yeah.
the Mortuary Cult, like Andy said, they scatter all over the place, and they begin to make crazy advancements very, very quick. However, it takes time. And what they are successful with very, very quickly is figuring out ways to extend Setra's life so that he lives a lot longer than anyone does before him. It's around this point, for those that are curious, that Setra also meets his Herald. After the Mortuary Cult has been established, Setra has been warring for years. At this point, his empire's already expanded to the Black Mountains, but now he's going further. Now he's expanding across the World's Edge Mountains, through the Charno Valley, or not Charno Valley, the passes north of like the Misty Mountain into the Darklands. He's now expanding into he's now expanding into what we know now as the Southern Empire. He's expanding into the Black Mountains, the Gray Mountains, the Apacini Mountains. He's expanding into Talea, Estalia. Like he's going everywhere.
And his influence is felt around the world. His people reach Lustria, they reach Cathay, they are all the way over in the pond. They're over in what will become all the various groups that we know. There are Nehekharans there, studying alongside them, attempting to subjugate them, working with them, working against them. They are everywhere.
Yeah, and his nation, and amongst this, there is a young man who makes a interesting presence in Setra's armies. Now, what's super fun and interesting about Nekaph is he demonstrates a really interesting thing about Setra, which is that in Nehekharan society, they had been basically absorbing tons of different human cultures because they were absorbing literally every tribe, either forcefully subjugating them or peacefully just taking them over and integrating them into Nehekharan society. And it's pretty heavily implied that Setra is probably like forcefully or probably not nicely taking like wives in all these different cultures and having children in all these different cultures. And he's expanding his influence. And some of these peoples migrate into the empire properly, and it's kind of a bit of a mess. But even Setra does not care where you're from, which is very unique about him in the lore perspective. A lot of the Nehekharans are very prejudiced against the people that are not native to Nehekhara, where they're viewed as barbarians. Like you're from one of the savage tribes of the Southland jungles, or you're from the nomadic desert peoples of what we know as Araby, or you're one of those northern tribes. Ugh. And
I'll intercede there and say a couple of places Setra is given the view that, for example, when he later on fights against Chaosy peeps, they are very much viewed as outside barbarians, and how dare they come upon his land. So there is a certain amount of that, but I think it's fair to because I don't think that what was said there was wrong.
I agree.
I think you've got those who are with Setra, they're cool, and those who are against him,
yes,
they are not cool. And that is where the differentiation lies. So if you're looking through the books and you find any references that say something along the lines of, oh, those filthy northern barbarians thought Setra or something similar, that does not necessarily mean that he thinks all people from the north are barbarians. What it means is they're the ones that are not underneath his control yet. They have not bent the knee, so to speak.
Yeah. So among Setra's armies, there are notes that a lot of his armies are made up by people who were born elsewhere or have parents that were born elsewhere. And these people suffer. We don't get a lot of details, but it talks about that they suffer prejudice from other Nehekharans. But Setra doesn't care so long as they perform and they're loyal. And one of these is a young man named Nekaph, who is very bluntly just kind of flat out stated to not be Nehekharan. His origin, or his blood origin, his parentage ties back to what we now know as the Empire, or maybe even Norska.
I think it's quite likely it's Norsey or some equivalent.
Yeah, but he's a big kid. Like, he's 18 years old and he's huge. By the time he's 18, he's a mountain of muscle, and he is full in on the Setra indoctrination. Like, he is so loyal to Setra and views him as a god. Like, culturally, he is a Nehekharan, even though he was not born necessarily there, or maybe he was born there, but his parents certainly weren't. And he ascends through the ranks of the army so that when he's 18, he is inducted into the personal tomb guard of Setra. And by the time he's 20, he takes over as one of the head members. And then very quickly after that, Setra personally acknowledges him and elevates him to the rank of Herald. And what's fascinating about that is that a lot of the kings in Nehekhara are very particular about, they usually like to rely on their sons and daughters as their princes and princesses, or their heralds are very specific individuals that are raised up from within their families or are direct servants of their families. Setra literally just found a stranger, just like basically a peasant child, who impressed him to such an extent that Setra was like, this kid understands loyalty and he's strong. He's big. Like, Nekaph is so big and powerful that Nekaph is literally talked about being able to crush men's skulls by punching them barehanded, which is pretty impressive. not just cracking their skull, he's caving in skulls with one hit. And Nekaph, the other thing is that Setra demonstrates a very shrewd being able to tell how useful people can be to him, because a lot of people see Nekaph for just a big brute, but Setra realizes that Nekaph is incredibly intelligent.
Yeah.
And Setra educates him. He makes sure that he is taught how to read and write, and that Nekaph, who is utterly dedicated, not only becomes incredibly infatuated and loyal to Setra, but becomes so educated that he memorizes incredible amounts of information. Because not only is he memorizing all of Setra's titles and everything, but he has to memorize what Setra says word for word. He has to memorize all of the laws. He has to memorize any like particular treaties or battles or issues that come up. And he is the personal emissary of Setra. And Setra trusts him so much to an extent that Nekaph is gifted the word of Setra, meaning that whatever Nekaph says is considered to be the word of Setra himself, because Setra trusts him that implicitly. And then he gives him his flail, the flail of skulls, which is an artifact that, funny enough, Setra actually wielded himself. So it wasn't just made for Nekaph. It was one of Setra's personal weapons. And it is literally, Setra killed a bunch of kings and warlords that pissed him off and wouldn't kneel, had them all decapitated, had their skulls clean, dipped in gold, and then put on chains attached to a flail, and then enchanted by the priests so that they bite and gnash and tear at people. And it's the flail of conquered kings is quite literally beating people to death with the people Setra didn't like, which is just crazy.
Proper metal. Love it.
Yeah. And so that's Nekaph. But I love Nekaph because it demonstrates a really interesting aspect of Setra, that he cares about results. All of the nitty gritty details, he doesn't give a shit. Like, he just doesn't care.
And I think that that's a super important aspect of his character, again, to try and look at it from the outside, because we can all read the army lists and the various stories and get a good sense of what they say. But when we try to think about who these people are, how do they gain the success that they gain? It's easy to say something like, oh, maybe he made a deal with the gods, the dark gods or something. But no, look at what he's doing. He is working according to the precepts of all of the gods that he potentially represents, and is doing what most people would consider to be utterly inhumane things. But it's very easy to then go, yes, but the creatures, the entities he's potentially serving or not serving, because he doesn't serve, that he is representing, that he is allowing to access the world, they are not human. Inhumanity is not a part of his language. He's not human or inhuman. He is Setra, and he does what needs to be done to make his everything work. And in his little chap there, he found someone who was just like him, potentially, and in time, definitely was.
Yes. So, all that to say, Setra gets old.
Yep, he does.
Despite
really old.
Despite everything the Priest Kings are doing, he starts getting weaker and older. And they're doing everything they can to preserve him. And the problem for them is that he's getting angrier and angrier and angrier.
And worse, weaker and weaker and weaker. And because he's getting weaker, his anger is being made manifest. So he is, where beforehand his anger would be an outburst. He would say, this has to be resolved or things are going to get worse. Now his anger is being, murder them, kill them all, they failed, bring in the new one. He's getting worse and worse and worse. And more, you could argue, afraid of the fact that his great dream will not be fulfilled or seen through. This entire period is also a fascinating one because we are somewhat devoid of what he actually does for most of this time. And I don't mean the simple stuff like he installed this rule and did this law and did this stuff. There is a very long period of time here where previously, in the space of just some 20 years, he manages to conquer an empire quite like any other. And then, given the centuries that follow, you would expect him to rule all of the Southlands. You would expect him to rule all of the old world, all of what lies beyond, but that doesn't happen. Indeed, his borders are somewhat nebulous. We don't know exactly how much further he goes. There's clearly an awful lot of pushback from somewhere during the course of this period. And this entire period, as I say, is somewhat nebulous. There's clearly a great conflict somewhere. There is clearly things that are stymieing him. There are clearly issues that he is facing, which in turn is going to make him, if anything, even more angry because his great millennial-long rule, the rule that should go on for effectively a million years, is constantly being stymied because he himself is getting weaker. And you can see the story that you could build from this because he's getting weaker. He can no longer take to the front lines in the way he used to be. He's getting more decrepit. He's getting angrier and older. And his rule is slowly fracturing, because it's no longer expanding at the pace that it used to be.
Yeah, and the last things I'll say in this particular segment before we check in with messages and stuff is that Setra, for the records we have, which the old world doesn't contradict, seems to stick to, Setra lives for long for a human, but in the grand scheme of things, not really that long. He lives for about 150 years. And like Andy said, the thing that's fascinating about him is that once he crosses that threshold from about once he gets into his 80s, that's when we really stop seeing Setra go anywhere. And he seems to spend about half of his life, about 70 years, just kind of hiding in Khemri, being just pissed. And granted, you can imagine he's surrounded by priests who on a daily basis are trying experiments and rituals, and they're trying to do all these things to make him live longer. Like just a man being fretted over by doctors. And he's old. It's not because they have not figured out eternal youth. Frankly, they actually never figured that out. They have figured out how to make him live longer, but he's not necessarily living in good shape longer. Yeah. So his 80s are kind of miserable, even though he was incredibly strong. So he was probably in much better shape than most 80-year-olds would be, but he's still 80. And by 150, he's bedridden. Probably more by his 120s. He literally, his death is miserable. There is a description of his death being that he is a frail old man in his bed who is spitting in rage. The mortuary priest can barely get a word in because he's cursing them constantly for their failures. Because he knows
them like the Skeksis.
Yeah.
the emperor of the Skeksis. You all. Yeah, he's proper raging because the time is coming to an end. And to make matters worse, as time passes by and the mortuary cult continues, they pretty much crack most of it.
Yeah, and what's kind of funny is there's a note that the mortuary cult purposefully kind of leads Setra on for a long time of that we got it. We're about to figure it out. And they don't before he dies. And there's a moment where they finally realize they have to tell him. They finally come to a decision where they're like, all right, everybody draw straws. Whoever gets the longest straw is the one that has to tell Setra he's about to die. Which honestly, that guy probably was executed more than likely. But so Setra, as he's dying, genuinely dying, the mortuary cult just keeps telling him over and over, we'll figure it out. Like, we tell you what, we haven't figured out how to make you immortal, but we did figure out how to bind your soul to your body so that you won't degrade in death. We have figured that part out. So we'll do that. We'll preserve you perfectly. We'll protect your body against the ravages of time. We'll protect your soul against everything that comes afterwards. And you'll hang out in paradise. And when you wake up, you're going to go to sleep. You're going to die. But when you come back, you will be in a golden paradise in a golden, godlike, immortal body. And you will reign for millions of years. We promise.
Yeah, you can see the Mortuary Cult committee. Right, so how are we going to sell this to him? Right, he's dying. Right, he knows he's dying. We know he's dying, and he's getting closer and closer to the edge. Whatever the gods were promising him, or what he believes is to occur, isn't going to happen. So how are we going to sell it in a fashion that he's going to run with it? And they come up with their cunning plan, and it's this. It's definitely a story.
Yeah. And so Settra the Imperishable at somewhere in the ballpark of 170, 150, somewhere around there, dies.
Yeah, he could be as old as, maybe about 170, 180, because it's all circa dates and it's all kind of difficult to be certain how old he was.
Yeah, and he dies 150 years into his reign, not at 150 years old. And Setra, and it quite literally says he literally dies mid-sentence with a curse on his lips. Like, he dies yelling at someone because he's Setra. And for before we go into the next part of the story, just catch up on all these messages really little quick. Was the most recent one. Did that one. Here we go. I feel the need to note that given his age at the time, the oldest of any Setra's kids could have been, for his great ritual, would have been 6 or 7 years old.
Yep.
Yeah. Setra did not sacrifice a bunch of teenagers or adults. He sacrificed like literally children and babies.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, he's literally the worst. Nippon and Cathay, what? Yeah, no, it's very clearly established that Nippon and Cathay were trading with Nehekhara, and the Lich Priests would have been there. Like, they were literally searching all over the world for information, and they were even stealing information too. They were being nefarious little shits in a lot of places.
I mean, if I had Setra telling me to do things, I would probably be going, yep. You want me to go where? The other side of the world? I'll figure it out.
Yeah. Hey, I don't have to be near him for his rages. I'm out of here. See you guys. I'm going on vacation. Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah. Morning to Crescent. When do we get to Dwarf Moses? So the Dwarf Moses from the Serpent Queen novel from Gotrek Felix. Fun character. He's after Setra, but he's probably around Nagashish time. Maybe a little before that. Is that why Rupresh the Seventh was able to rule safely? I feel like that's a joke referencing something, and I don't know what it is, but I'm sure Hammond will let us know.
Seventh. Please confirm that one, because I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
Arantiel, so would Setra be jealous of Shuken guns? Humans with naturally long lifespans and magic abilities, something he did not have naturally. Yes, he would have hated them immensely, though the second he found out they were dragon-blooded, I think he would still be immensely jealous, but I think he would have probably an interesting perspective on that, in that he would probably not really see them as human to an extent. I'm actually it would be really fascinating to explore what Setra's thoughts on something like that would be, because they're humans with the things he wants because they had dragons for parents.
Yeah, if the truth of that came out, because this is very early in the whole timeline, but if the truth of that came out and his ambassadors out there figured this shit out, there's going to be kidnappings, there's going to be experiments, there's going to be trying to figure out ways that they could take what they have and, I don't know, use their blood, inject it into themselves in some sort of, I don't know, blood ritual type way.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, that may well have happened. Like, it's very possible Lich Priests in Cathay may have kidnapped Shukagans and, like, they were injecting Setra with that stuff.
Yeah, it would not surprise me at all. In fact, I would argue, given that we know what ends up happening to the Mortuary Cult, they effectively become immortal. And that's coming from somewhere. There's all manner of different stories across the Warhammer world, and there's a really good one there. And it allows you to start wrapping together lore from different corners of the Warhammer world together, something that I think the old world is uniquely positioned to start doing. So it'll be super fascinating to see if anyone picks up that bit and goes, oh, we could use that, bridge that into there, because that'll make it make some more sense.
Yep. Mandatas, do I love Nekaph's new model? Yes, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, it is.
I do wish that he had a special rule that let him like attach to Setra's chariot. He doesn't. He just kind of runs around on foot. But his model is gorgeous, and I love his big old scroll. Like, it's awesome. Remember Kingdoms having gunpowder imported from Cathay, but that was against the guy. And that's from the Nagash trilogy, which I just don't like. I feel like Cathay took a while to get like turn their gunpowder into actual weapons. They use gunpowder for different things for a long time. And I just don't, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And it also doesn't match with the stories we have, like the canonical first new lore, old world lore, and army book lore about how Setra was defeated, or Nagash was defeated. I hate the idea that Nagash was defeated because he didn't know what a gun was, and he walked in front of a gun line and got shot. It's a stupid story, and I hate it. The army of the Seven Kings defeating him because Nehekhara united against him, not because they used foreign arms.
Yeah, so very loosely speaking, the novels contradict the army lists and the output from the prime game. That being the case, the novels have to be taken with a certain amount of pinch of saltiness, because whilst yes, they may drill into lots of fun details, if they actually contradict details that we already have from the main line, which is considered to be, as far as Games Workshop's concerned, the core of what their individual settings are about. You go buy yourself the Tomb King army list, or its equivalent as we move on, and it's absolutely essential that everything matches that. And when a novel contradicts it, very quickly that novel becomes not one that is referenced by others.
Yep. Commander Bode should have given Setra a magma dragon's heart. Later you'll probably talk about it, but how does Setra use magic? Well, we're not there yet, but we will get there.
Yeah, we will get
after Setra comes back to life.
Yeah.
But yes, he was not born a wizard, which is going to make what he does after he comes back to life absolutely insane. How does Joff feel about this whole binding souls to body thing? Would that deny their afterlife? So that there is a really interesting thing to consider about the Nehekharan pantheon as a whole, where Setra's obsession with not death but defeating death led to, and this is kind of the next thing we're going to go into, so I'll come back to this in a second because we're about to get into it, so we'll get into that in just a second. Let me get this last thing out of the way. Is Setra actually just Kremlo? Get out of my chat. Viper Wolf, are there living humans who still worship the Nehekharan gods? Follow-up question: did the Tomb King's protector have any living humans working / serving? Thanks, guys. Does anyone still living worship the Nehekharan gods? Not that I've ever heard of. Doesn't mean they don't exist. There are some tidbits that there might be some nomadic desert tribes or some groups in Araby that still do, which would make sense. But there's not a lot.
Yeah, the biggest problem here is that we have a dearth of useful lore in the region that isn't just Tomb Kings. And thus, we don't really have any great awareness of what else lies beyond them. But what little hints and tips we have, what similar hints and tips we have of Araby suggest that, yes, there will be not just a holdout, there will be lots of different peoples who are worshipping, revering, or studying them in a variety of different ways. So the answer is tentatively yes until they say definitively no.
Yeah, and as far as living humans, Old World has 100% confirmed that the city, I think it's Numis, which is where King Tutankhamun rules, which is fun to say. They have brought back that living humans live there. That there was a group, there were some nomadic desert tribes that came, I think, from the Badlands that settled into the ruins of his city, and it's kind of implied that they mistake Tutankhamun for one of their gods. The Scythians, yeah. And they worship him as a god, but he is okay with this. Typical Tomb King. Oh, you think I'm a god? Of course. So it's the living city. So there are people that live there, and it actually has agriculture, which is really, really fascinating. So it is an active Tomb King city that has living humans in it that are trading. That is the new Old World lore, which is great and adds in some really interesting dynamics and actually allows for other races to encounter like actual Tomb King stuff. So it's a city where the living and the dead work hand in hand, which is a concept that appears quite often, but it's limited just to that city. Most of the Tomb Kings are pretty intolerant of living people because they get jealous. So
I think you missed one from Jonathan.
Oh, was there anyone who earned Setra's respect? Nekaph.
Yeah,
Nekaph did.
And I think it's fair to say that we are talking about somebody who ruled for like he will eventually rule for centuries, but for century plus. It's a very long time, and during the course of that time, there will be highs, there will be lows, there will be allegiances, there will be failures, there will be successes. There will, to begin with, be an awful lot of youthful arrogance turned into wisdom as time goes on. There will be many that are in the court who have earned his respect, who have got a right to be there. There will be many that he hates, dislikes in a variety of ways, and many who will be killed because of this. But loosely speaking, try not to think of it just in terms of single characters, because that's the one we have in the army list. Try to think of it as one great big kingdom, and it's beyond just a kingdom. It's an actual empire at this point. It's spread out around what we now know of as the land of the dead, and covers many, many, many peoples, many of whom, as has already been said, have come back. So I think the answer to that one is yes, but there's not a lot of detail.
Yeah, so like one of the new ones we got in the old world, the new old world lore is that there is king. There is King Settra the Imperishable, who is a very well trusted and liked lieutenant of Setra's, who's going to play a very big role in the upcoming Lords of the Lance book. I don't want to necessarily spoil what happens to, but I'm not. We obviously don't know how it happens, but he dies. Is the thing. Hilariously, his corpse gets taken by an orc warlord who uses it as a back banner, which is fucking hilarious. And I love that little tidbit. But anyway, back to actual Setra lore. So Setra is dead. With Setra's death, a couple of things are set massively into motion, which is that the Mortuary Cult has very quickly after this, almost as if they were kind of holding back on making sure Setra didn't get it, figures out immortality. Granted, they figure out the crap version of immortality.
Like that. Yeah. Boom! Hey!
It's literally immediately afterwards. So they figure out the garbage version of immortality, which is they do not get eternal youth, but their souls are bound into their bodies. They get really desiccated and old and wrinkly and stuff. But as long as they are not killed by like a blade or something specific, they are immortal.
Yep.
And they take over. The Mortuary Cult is able to now go to all the kings and say, hey, Setra had this giant pyramid built in the city of Khemri, right in the center. The Great Pyramid of Setra was this giant white marble pyramid. And they go, you know what?
Setra, it's got to be bigger than everybody else because
it's
Setra.
Fucking massive.
Fucking huge. There's the little city line, and there's his huge pyramid.
Yeah, and so the Mortuary Cult, all the priests, all the different kings go, oh, well, Setra's body was preserved for eternity, and he's going to come back for a reign of 1,000,000 years and all this stuff. I want to come back with a golden perfect body. What do I need to do? And the Mortuary Cult goes, just give us some money, maybe. Give us some influence. And the Mortuary Cult becomes the most powerful force in all of Nehekhara. Pretty much overnight.
We'll support you, my king. All you need do is these particular rituals, and you will live forever in a golden afterlife as we continue on living for centuries.
Yeah. So this is the big pivoting point when Nehekhara goes from being kind of a normal-ish human civilization to a human civilization that is completely and utterly obsessed with death, where their lives become more about preparing for death than actually living, to the point where the people of Nehekhara are constantly building pyramids, none so as grand as Setra's, but pyramids and sphinxes and sarcophagi and statues to the gods, things to guard them in death, things to protect the kings, to watch over them. And because Setra, of course, his pyramid is giant for a reason. Setra was like, oh, well, if I'm going to come back, I want to come back with all my stuff.
Yeah. And not just all his stuff, all his people.
Yeah.
Because they all go in there too, and they all die too.
Yeah. Setra's entire legion commits ritual suicide.
Yeah.
Nekaph is literally said to be the first person that dies after Setra. As soon as Setra dies, Nekaph kills himself. Because he follows his lord everywhere.
Into the afterlife.
Yep.
It's a fascinating period that's about to come as well, because not only do we have the rise of the Mortuary Cult and the great lie in many respects of dwarves, elves, the elder races being the old living ones. No, the mortuary cult have already mastered it. They'll live longer than pretty much everybody else now. Dwarves are not the long life species. Humans in this particular form most certainly are. And it completely turns what many people view as the Warhammer world up on its head, because human society is not just freaking ancient, it's also extremely long lived if you're privileged. It's not for everybody. After all, those firstborns are living pretty much forever, assuming they can scale up the pyramid, if you wish to use such a metaphor, and get to the points where the great rituals can be cast upon them so that they can live forever. Long life becomes the obsession, but it is held by a very tight and select few. And the great kings, the great leaders, they don't really get it. They get instead something that they are told is better. They're going to come back like gods in perfect bodies, unlike these horrible wizened old folk who are sitting off to the sides going, yes, my lord. They're awful. The mortuary cult are not the end that anybody really wants. It looks absolutely horrific. However, they do get promised something better, and king after king after king raises up and becomes the absolute best in their own minds. They all become heirs of Setra, for example, or alternatively, even better, Nehek himself reborn. They are all, each and every one of them, the best that ever was, and are going to come back like golden freaking gods and rule everything in the afterlife. Yeah, let's see how that turns out.
It's quite literally a pyramid scheme in multiple ways.
In some ways.
Yeah. So to put it in perspective, Nehekhara becomes so obsessed with death and starts pouring so many of its own resources into preparations for the afterlife, not in the sense of like the realm of souls, but returning to the mortal plane to rule over all of reality, that the cities become more like tombs. Hence, it's kind of the concept of tomb cities, where the dead grossly outnumber the living. If you were to arrive in like the city of Khemri, for instance, you would from a distance go, wow, look at all those crazy huge buildings. Look at the sprawl of the city, how fucking massive it is. There must be like millions of people that live there. And then when you actually get in there, it's like maybe hundreds of thousands, if that, probably not even that. And you're like, where's all the people? The vast majority of the city is empty because it's a tomb. It's just full of the dead. Because you have to keep in mind, these Tomb Kings are such jerks, to be frank, because Setra did this because he was a jerk, that every time one of them dies, they take hundreds or thousands of people with them. They take their armies, they take their servants, they take their horses and everything is ritually killed and mummified and put in there with them. And the Mortuary Cult, depending on how important you are to a Tomb King, and more importantly, how much money you pay them, you are preserved to various levels, where kings were preserved with every single ritual and rite they could possibly conceive of, whereas like your basic soldiers, they got enough preservation to make sure that, their soul isn't, cast into the cold, dark oblivion, but is somewhere in the realm of souls where it can be called upon later. And this is the state of affairs for a good couple, like 300 to 400 years.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah. And so Nehekhara becomes a land where people are obsessed with death. And this has a dramatic effect on the Nehekharan pantheon, where all of the gods that are not Usirian, who watches over the souls that have died, because he is the god of the underworld. He is the god that they're all going to hang out with. So everyone begins just showering Usirian with worship. And Patra goes from being the head of the pantheon to kind of not as much. Like, he still is, and he's still very important. The sun's still a huge deal, but people become so obsessed with, oh, well, yeah, sure, like the sun's there and that's kind of important, but I'm going to be dead for like probably centuries, if not millennia. I got to make sure that Usirian has a really good place for me, that I get like a proper seat at his table.
Yeah, it's all about how the people view it, really. As far as the people are concerned, one god rises up amongst all others as being central to their lives and their lifestyles, and most importantly, their afterlives. Regardless of what the gods are or are not, this particular group of peoples focus on one of those gods because of what? basically Setra did. Setra, it completely changed the worship of the gods, the way the gods are approached, literally undid everything that had been done before just to eke out a few more years of life. And as we know, for all the Mortuary Cult did succeed, they didn't really succeed for him. Kinda. Although it is worth saying that the continued rituals that they probably yearly keep on lacing upon that Great Pyramid in Khemri does have a significant effect.
Yes. So
significant effect.
Yeah. Now we're gonna fast forward. Because we're following Setra's perspective. If you want to know more about what happens, go watch our Nagash stream.
Yes.
So Nagash happens. And Nagash takes a while. It's a whole fucking ordeal that takes hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But eventually, Nagash is defeated. And when Nagash is killed by good old King Alcatazar the Conqueror, his great ritual of awakening, which was supposed to resurrect all the dead in the world, goes off the rails. And in Nehekhara, it has a very particular effect, which is that with the exception of Setra, because the wards protecting his pyramid are so powerful that even Nagash's ritual was not able to break them. That's how strong the seals on his pyramid were, which is insanely impressive.
Yeah, now you could argue that's because they were so terrified he might come back.
Yeah, that's true. So, like Andy said, and we were talking about earlier, pyramid scheme situation, right?
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands of tomb kings and queens and princesses and princes all wake up. All of their armies wake up. They march outside and go, finally, my time has begun. Wait, what'd you just say? No, it's my time to rule. And it's a complete clusterfuck.
Oh boy, is it. Now, Nagash's great ritual. Go back and watch our stream about Nagash so that you can get all the nitty gritty about that. But it was supposed to bring all of them underneath Nagash's control. That was the whole point of it. Now, Nagash is an individual, the great necromancer, the founder of necromancy, who was in a position to understand what was going on, also deeply steeped in the mortuary cult's many mysteries, was fully aware of what they knew, what they could do, and what he was going to do to undo it all. It would have been successful if it hadn't been for those pesky kids. And I won't say who the pesky kids are, go watch the other stream. But it completely fucked up. That's the long and short of it. And it meant that all of them woke up, and they still, especially those who had been bound up with all manner of rituals, had their own free will. And that meant that we had not just one, not just two, not just 10, not just 50. We had well over a millennium's worth of eternal... how do we even describe them? Each and every one of them is like a mini Setra. They all believe that they have the divine right to rule forever because they are the heir of Setra, or they did better than Setra, or they were the heir of this person or that person or whoever. They all woke up and they all took their armies out and went, I'm king, God damn it! Why is everyone saying this? I am Spartacus. As they all reached out and claimed that they are the true rulers of Nehekhara. And they are the ones who should lead. But in the background, back in Khemri, the biggest pyramid of them all is quiet because Setra has not stirred.
Yep. And to catch up with these real quick, Hammond, yes, the answer is yes to your Rupesh question. And Dantas, am I aware the Arabian Rod for Total War Warhammer 3 added the Scythian nomads worshipping Tutankhamun to the game? Yeah, I'm aware of the mod. Yep. What do you think would have happened if the old ones had met Setra by the formidable priest came for the answer to the struggle against chaos? I honestly don't think the old ones would have tolerated Setra, to be honest with you. They probably would have been like, this was a mistake. Humanity was a mistake. Go back. Go just start over from scratch.
After all, humanity are the ones that bring about the end of the world. So
yeah,
hey,
man.
straight.
Ricky Scotty, a little late made the stream. Setra's do not serve. Setra hits the nay on everyone. Fear his big schmooze. Yep, dancing queen. All these tomb kings are now fighting everywhere. Nehekhara itself is on the brink of utter disaster because there's just people fighting. Like tomb kings are fighting in their pyramids. They're fighting in the streets. They're fighting in all these tomb cities. We're talking about millions of skeletons and mummies and all these constructs. The tomb kings are yelling at their various. And the mortuary cult is sitting there going, "Oh fuck!
Like,
yeah, this is."
But It's even worse because all of them are led by people who are absolutely convinced they were about to arrive in this golden kingdom. And it's not a golden kingdom. By this point, it has become the lands of the dead in almost all ways. It is an absolute hellish nightscape of a place in comparison to what they expected to come. So not only are they a bunch of privileged upstart brats, all of whom think that they are the ones who should rule, but they're also really peeved because it didn't turn out the way they wanted.
So the Mortuary Cult cannot get shit under control. And in the midst of this, Archon the Black is still running around. And Archon the Black is in Khemri, and he's successfully winning.
Let me just pop in and say, who is Archon the Black, Sotek, so that people who may not know who he is and who haven't watched our Nagash stream, why haven't you watched our Nagash stream? But a quick summary of who he is, just so that people understand.
Well, first of all, go watch the stream. Second of all, he is Nagash's like ultimate lieutenant. He's Nagash's right hand. And an incredibly powerful sorcerer in his own right, incredibly powerful necromancer in his own right, and he's a lich. So he's an immortal skeleton dude, and he's a pain in the ass to deal with. But in any event, he almost takes over Khemri, which is what forces good old Grand Hierophant Nekaph, who is kind of implied to be probably the Grand Hierophant who was in charge when they finally kind of locked down the whole immortality thing. He realizes that they need Setra.
This dude's like probably 1,300 years old or more.
Yeah. So Nekaph wanders over to Setra's pyramid. He cracks open all of the wards and he goes in and he wakes them up. And what's known is that when Setra wakes up, he notices two things immediately. The first is that the Herald Nekaph is already awake, standing next to him, ready to go. The second is that he's hideous.
Yep.
He is a desiccated mummy with some of his organs, a lot of his like preserved goodies still visible. And he gets up and he looks around and goes, "What the fuck?"
Yeah.
And Nekaph goes, "Hey, I know you're mad, but there's like a huge war going on outside the pyramid. If you want to deal with that real quick, and then I'll catch you up." And Setra,
I'll catch you up later.
Yeah, to be fair to Setra, and granted, honestly, that's probably what kind of saved Nekaph is that Setra got to vent his rage on all of the other Tomb Kings. Because Setra goes out and in basically a day he conquers Khemri. He kicks the crap out of Archon the Black, chases Archon out of the city, and he dominates all of the other kings. And then he calls Nekaph and the Mortuary Cult to him, and he sits back down on his throne and demands answers. And the Mortuary Cult gets the awesome job of explaining to him what's happened over the last 1,000+ years, including the whole Nagash incident. And to say that Setra's rage was apocalyptic is a grotesque understatement. He banishes Grand Hierophant Nekaph. He basically tells him, like, since you woke me up and allow me to like deal with this, I'm gonna let you live, but you are banished on pain of death unless you figure out how to give me what you promised me.
And I think that we should pause just a moment there to realize that for all Setra is the worst, there is clearly more going on with him here. Look at him. He's in an absolute horror show of a state. Now, he's got all of his faculties, he's got all of his strength, but he does not have all of everything he was promised, the immortal youth that would continue forever. He is not just in a position where his rage, if it was as legendary as claimed, should have taken this now immortal creature's life. He should have killed him if he was uncontrolled, if he was rage-filled. He isn't. He's clever. He's cunning. He knows what he's doing. He realizes that this individual was the man who cracked it, and will almost certainly crack the next step too. And he just hasn't had, let's say, the same pressure
motivation
upon him. Motivation, yes, because he's succeeded and he's quite used to his eternal existence. He has moved past the point where he cares about many of the mortal considerations, like what the fuck he looks like. That's no longer an issue for him anymore. He's well beyond that. It is not the case for Setra. He did not live a very long life. He lived for almost a couple of centuries, perhaps. He is still filled with all of the desire to return to what he was. And he looks at this person and he sees someone who could bring it to him. So he doesn't kill him. And if you look at the character as he's described, prideful, boastful, beyond any reasonable amount of morality. Yes, he is all of those things, but he is also extremely calculating. He knows what he's doing. And arguably, it is decisions like these that mark him out as important to the gods, because he does the right thing in the bigger picture. Now, he on the microcosm might be the absolute worst. In fact, let's move beyond that. Is the absolute worst. But on the bigger picture, he is enormously influential, enormously capable, enormously, now, as much as we've just been saying raging, but calm. Because when he needs to make the cold decision, he does. He banishes him. And I know that that doesn't sound like it's a good end. And it almost feels a little bit like, oh, there's a writer out there who didn't want to kill the character. No, don't look at it that way. Always look at it in an attempt to try and understand why. And you can see the why as clear as day, because this is the person who can get him the answers that he wants. So he pretty much gives them the motivation. Your entire life is gone until you give me what I want.
Yeah. And for a lot of the Nehekharans, including the Mortuary Cult, like by the time the Mortuary Cult kind of figured out immortality, it's sort of implied that none of them were alive at the same time Setra was. It was like the generation after that. Yeah. So for them, like this is kind of like Jesus coming back. Like this is a big fucking deal. You don't want to piss off Setra. Setra's like, it's fucking Setra. Him being angry at you is the gods being angry at you. Not a great place to be.
I'm going to pick up an earlier comment that was dropped in the stream. I forgot who dropped it by. And if we're looking for a historical figure, you might be better looking at Alexander the Great. I don't think that is a bad idea, or what is left in the world for him to conquer. Yeah. And Alexander's divine origins as well, as they were roundly described. And Alexander the Great coming back and conquering, utterly conquering, and saying, I will continue to do so and bring everything back to the order it should have. It is quite literally a mythical figure. King Arthur, if you're English, coming back and actually being everything that he was described as, because that's the big thing. When Setra comes back, he is literally everything that he was described as over 1,000 years earlier. The dude is super capable and super scary and super angry.
Yeah, so at this point, Setra sets about reclaiming, again, all of Nehekhara. He goes around to all the other tomb cities. He basically says, I'm back in charge, and I'm going to get order. Because what he does is he tells the Mortuary Cult, I'm going to pick a select amount of kings and their legions who get to stay awake. Everyone else goes back to sleep. They're going to go back in their pyramids or their tombs, and you're going to put them back into the realm of souls, and they're going to rest. That way, everyone's not fucking fighting all the time. And he does that to every single tomb city. He goes to all the cities and tells them, all right, you get to stay awake, and the rest of you go back to bed. And we'll, they figured out systems, like some of them rotate, where like certain kings will wake up for a while, others will go back to sleep and stuff like that. But Setra, very uniquely, is the only tomb king who never goes back to sleep. He never again returns to the realm of souls. Where the rest of, even like the likes of Khalida goes back into her like sarcophagus and rests for decades, if not centuries at a time. Setra never, ever again, because he doesn't trust the Mortuary Cult. And this leads to one of the most profound fucking things he does, which is that at this point, Setra realizing that he can't trust the Mortuary Cult, not that he necessarily ever did, but now that he really can't, he teaches himself to use magic, which is not really supposed to be possible.
Right. So there are arguments that can be made here. He may have always had the ability, but he was not in a world where that ability could properly manifest when he was alive first time round. That would be one argument, and possibly is nonsense. Another one could be that all the rituals that he's been steeped in, all of the time that he has spent being wrapped round with various magics, both divine and arcane, have unleashed within him the ability to unleash magics in turn. That's also potentially one way of looking at it. Another one, he's just super freaking clever and he's figured it out. That's not really the Warhammer way. You also have the possibility that there are various entities that he could have discussed, various things that he could have made deals with. He's not the deal-making type. He's the command-making type. So that, again, doesn't really feel very Settra. The most likely outcome is that he's just not what he was when he was mortal. And his sheer willpower means that he will succeed. That's one. On the other hand, the very likely option, he's quite literally chosen by the gods. And the gods themselves allow him access to things that had previously been deemed to be unacceptable. But we're in a different world now, 1,300 years later, or however many it is exactly. And that world is a world steeped in magic, where the vortex is slowly weakening as repeated attacks have been made, as the various stones that had been put up are beginning to go back down again, as the beastmen are slowly beginning to rise and turn many of them into herd stones across the world. We are in a different version of the world, and the gods themselves will have, as much as one can ever say they have an opinion, the gods themselves have a different view as to how these things should manifest. You could very easily just take the line of argument that the gods went, yes, Setra, this is where you are, and now it's time for you to be blessed, so to speak. There's lots of answers, and I don't think we have a definitive answer that is entirely pleasing yet for exactly how he did it.
The only thing we do know for sure is that he does learn language, how to speak the language of magic, which in and of itself is very impressive. And he studies the secrets of the mortuary priests. He basically forces them to teach him a lot of what he knows because he doesn't want to rely on them. Like, granted, Setra is not a powerful wizard. He's a very, very weak wizard. And it frustrates him a lot. Like, there's a lot about he is personally very infuriated that he is not a master of magic. Instead, he's only able to kind of grab it enough where he can move his own legions so that he doesn't have to purely rely on the Lich Priest, so they cannot hold that over him. Because that was his whole thing, is that he like Andy said, he's very clever. He very quickly figured out that the power dynamic between him and the Mortuary Cult was skewed, because without them, he could not motivate his legions. He couldn't raise his legions. So he learned just enough that if he had to, he could do it himself. He prefers not to, because he's not as skilled at it as he would like to be. But his magic basically allows him to enforce his will on the Nehekhara and undead near him, which is very impressive. And kind of, I do think it very much leans kind of in the scheme that if you think about the lore of Nehekhara, a lot of the actual aspects of it when it comes to Hierophants is very much using that relationship they have with Usirian through magic to bring souls from the realm of souls and bind them back into a body or a statuary or something. And Usirian is the crux of that form of magic. And Setra is Usirian's favorite boy, to the point where Usirian personally protects him from foul magics, which is a god going that out of their way to deflect magic, to the point where Setra's protection from magic literally is inviolable until Usirian itself is killed by Nagash in the end times. That's how dedicated Usirian is to protecting Setra, which says a lot.
Yeah. I'll also add a small addition in terms of his overall power. Whilst in comparison to the great powers of the world, he is really not powerful at all. In comparison to everyone else, he kind of is. Now, in the greater Warhammer scheme, he's really low. He's really down there. He is not big on the whole magic front. But in terms of how powerful he is just in general, he's far more powerful than pretty much any Warhammer Fantasy roleplay character is ever likely to achieve. For example, in terms of just his magic, he is really quite up there, while simultaneously really being small in the bigger Warhammer scheme. It's all about scale, really. And for someone who is so self-reliant, so convinced of his own extraordinary ability, it's a source of frustration.
Yeah, granted, his functional immunity to magic like heavily skews him higher than you would suspect in the power scaling. Because most characters that are like, it's like, oh, Nagash, one of the strongest characters in the setting, like, you'd think, which To note, we're kind of running low on time, and I do want to start getting
We
to
are.
questions.
I'm just noticing that.
So I'm going to get caught up on Super Chats real quick, and then I'm going to give kind of a summary of what Setra does after this, because it's mostly just like Setra fights this guy, Setra fights this guy, Setra fights this guy.
You're going to find the next section is basically Setra's back. Setra fights everyone.
Yeah,
but yet somehow Setra never really goes any further than the land of the dead.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. We're kind of past the exciting stuff, is what I'm kind of
trying to say. Are.
So let me get caught up. Okay, so here we go from Ricky Scotty. I always wonder how the Tomb Kings would war amongst themselves. Is it possible for their loyal Lich Priests to steal the opposing soldiers to the other Tomb Kings that get knocked apart? Yes. That would be absolutely doable. Yep.
Yeah, totally.
That's why.
As a small addition, remember war with with all of them is very different to the war that's conducted by all the other Warhammer species, because they don't tire, they don't stop, they just keep going. The only holdback really is the mortuary priests themselves, who are altogether too mortal for all of their immortality.
They're very skeeved out by combat because they can die. They can just die.
Yeah, totally. Where all of the skeletons, they just go, and that means that they conduct warfare unlike anyone anywhere else, and that is something that is often forgotten in the writing, or often reinforced for a paragraph and then never really used again, because they can march day and night without fail, without any worries of endurance getting in the way, or having to have a quick kip, or having to have themselves a quick bite to eat. Nash. They have a completely different setup. So be aware of that if you're ever using them in one of your games. They are quite a different army.
And remember, the Tomb Kings literally fight each other for fun. Like, literally. For fun and for, like, bragging rights. They will destroy one another.
Bragging rights, most certainly.
Yeah. I'll wake up, I'll start screaming, the cult in the corner, oh shit, the consequences of our actions.
God damn it! Yeah, I think that's entirely fair. But wait, so what exactly did we tell him all those days ago? What's he going to come out and expect? Oh shit, we're in so much trouble.
Yeah. The queue line of Tomb Kings that were probably trying to kill the Mortuary Cult, which is probably a big reason they had to wake up Setra, was not necessarily they were like, oh, the city's going to destroy. It's that Setra's the only one, like, at least there would be one guy angry at us instead of everybody angry at us. Mandatus, my contemptible spawn did so. It is time for I and my assured magnificence to master this myself. I implore the gods once more to give me my right.
Yeah, that I think is a very good way of answering it.
It's not arrogance if you could back it up, Setra, probably.
100% the case with Setra. I always find him I always find him a fascinating character, because he is quite clearly a genius. He is quite clearly extraordinary, yet somehow the lore has managed to forget it again and again and again, and just turn him into the bad guy they're fighting this week. And that has always, for me, been somewhat of a shame, because, again, Warhammer is at its strongest when there isn't good and evil. Warhammer is at its strongest when it's competing ideals, when it's different motivations, when everybody has got their own thing that they want. And Setra clearly has a very defined set of goals that he's looking for. Yet somehow, if you look through the histories, he doesn't just fail at it. He only succeeds really once. And that's when he was mortal as a kid. After that, he pretty much fails again and again and again, because he's used as the bad guy of the week. And I feel that that is a massive underserving of character, because the character himself is actually quite extraordinary. He set into action pretty much Age of Sigmar as we know it by his decisions, because of everything that occurs in the end times only could come to pass because of many of the things that he did. Nagash is his fault, you could argue. The Mortuary Cult, many of the great nations of the old world exist because of many of the deeds that Setra had done when he was alive. He's a fascinating individual that I feel has been not used to his best so far, which is why I'm so delighted to see that he is a central component to the old world game.
Yep. Cornjima, how loyal are the Lich Priests to their kings because they can't just stop the Civil War by not resurrecting armies for their kings? A lot of the Lich Priests are very they're very loyal, but you have to remember they can die, and they're very keenly aware of that. And while yes, they are key to resurrecting the Tomb King's legions, a lot of the Tomb King's legions when the Civil War started were already up because Nagash's magic resurrected everybody. The Lich Priests, they weren't in a situation where they were like, until y'all behave, we're not going to give you any armies. Everybody already had their armies. That
and
was
to
the
make
problem.
matters worse, you might have yourself a Lich Priest who had served 14 of them.
Yeah, and he'll pick one as his favorite.
And how do you deal with that when all 14 come to you and say, right, great, I'm back. This is shit. Don't like how I look. Could be better, but I'm back. Hey, wait a minute. Who the fuck is this? Wait, that's my grandson. Wait, what? My great-great-granddaughter? No, fuck this. No. She was a baby. Yeah, no. I'm the boss. And they're like, no, you're an old man. Your laws were stupid. I'm better. And the Lich Priest is like, difficult position to be in.
Very not a great time. Would it be fair to say that Setra basically uses brute force and sheer will to manipulate magic? Basically. He ham fists it.
But he's really clever. And it's really easy
to
fall on brute force.
But stupid about it.
Brute intelligence might be better. He doesn't just push his way through shouting "wah" like he's an orc. He is applying everything that he's got to try and master something that is probably quite beyond him. But he also has 1,000 other things to do, let's be honest, because, the world to conquer.
Yep. Levgod, from what I remember, Setra just disappears after the world blows up at the end times. I would love for him to return to AOS as a new god of dead, acting as a rival for Nagash.
Walks nicely into the sunset.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe one day. All right.
Maybe one day. Because awesome.
I'm going to speed run us through the rest of
the
Setra story because it's a lot of kind of the same stuff that happens.
Go.
The basic scheme of it is that after Setra wakes up, reconquers Nehekhara, gets all the Tomb Kings back in line, and amidst this, a bunch of crazy incidents go down. There's an incident where, probably one of my favorites, which is very goofy, is there's an incident where a Lich Priest accidentally rips open a portal to the Realm of Chaos next to Khemri, which causes demons to pour out. And the fighting, I think the high elves end up detecting it or something, because I remember the high elves show up, and Setra actually allies with the high elves.
Which, again, super important detail.
Yeah,
to discuss Setra as a whole.
Yeah, and so they have a big fight. Eventually they win, and the final is literally ended by Setra picking up the Mortuary Priest who miscast in the first place, and he throws him into the Realm of Chaos portal to close it, which is hilarious. There are other incidents. Setra invades the Badlands a couple of times. He has a big fight against a whole army of wyverns that he wins quite successfully. He invades Sartosa because he actually finds out that
multiple times.
Yeah, there's a big one where he finds out Nehekhara is there, and also there's a Black Ark of the Dark Elves there, and he bodies them. Absolutely fucking bodies them. Despite the fact that it's Dark Elves and vampires teamed up, Setra just mops the fucking floor with them, and Nehekhara is forced to flee north. He invades Bretonnia, and so in the old world lore, we actually get that in the really, really OG back in the day lore, he was one of the big bads for Gilles Le Breton. That's no longer the case. In the new lore, though, we do have that in 1175 of the Imperial calendar, he invades Bretonnia with a big fleet. So he sails across the ocean and arrives on the coast of Bretonnia. This proves to be a bad thing because when he invades by ocean, he gets in a naval fight where Setra isn't really able to bring a lot of his strength to bear. And he actually is defeated. His navy is defeated. And while he personally escapes, he's really upset and pissed. So he falls back, and we basically don't see him again for Bretonnia affairs until the old world, which is in roughly 2250, which is now, or 2276 is where we are now, where Setra is full on invading the border princes. If you pick up the Arcane Tomes, there's a whole story about it where basically he has very successfully invaded the border princes, and he learned his lesson from last time. He's not taking his fleet to Bretonnia. Instead, he splits his army into 3 pieces. He sends half his army across the Black Gulf to launch one assault there. He sends another army north through the Badlands to lay siege to Badak Var and a couple of other cities to make sure they can't reinforce from the east. And then he has a third strike force, which is his army that takes a fleet specifically to a certain city where he's going to take over, and from there use that as a launch point to go to war with Bretonnia, which is where this is probably going to be the first campaign book we get, which I'm very, very excited for. I'm pretty sure he's going to kill King Luin Orcslayer, which will be pretty fantastic.
Yeah, that seems very likely, doesn't it?
Yeah, because King Luin Orcslayer is due to die. His time is coming up. But there are several other things. Oh, another really big thing is when Nagash returns, which leads to Nagash invading the Empire and fighting Sigmar Heldenhammer. Nagash actually tries to go back home. He tries to go back to Nehekhara, to go back to his Black Pyramid, which is even bigger than Setra's. And he shows up and goes, look at all these undead. Well, I created you, so you're going to do what I tell you to. And Setra is so goddamn strong that Setra says, no, not only am I not going to listen to you, none of my boys are going to listen to you, and now we're going to fight. And the Wars of the Dead happen, and Setra kicks the shit out of Nagash.
Yeah, hands him his ass.
He literally chases him all the way back to Nagash's Ar.
Yep.
Which is hilarious because Nagash, that is literally the worst Nagash ever is humbled. By
Sigmar gave it a good go.
Yeah, I mean, Sigmar kind of got lucky in my opinion.
Al-Qadazar actually, I'd say Al-Qadazar gave him a good go
true.
too.
That's true. That's
but
true.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't die this time.
Yeah, but Nagash, for Nagash, it was probably very unsettling fighting someone he probably kind of viewed as a hero. And also his ancestor, who fucking hates him. Yep. Hates him immensely. There's literally no one. There is no one Setra hates more than Nagash.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's fair. So we end up in the end times, and we, as we've said, don't really discuss the end times too much in the streams beyond our end time rants that we occasionally have. And over the course of what is almost the entire span of the Warhammer world since it first fell to chaos, we've got Setra popping up again and again and again in a variety of ways. When he was young and he was mortal, he conquered whatever he saw. But then he grew old, and that ancient curse that afflicts all mortals eventually brought him down. But by the time that he died, a grand old age of almost 170, the cults that he established cracked, loosely, immortality. He was brought back to life by a mortuary cult, the very people that he'd instilled and created to extend life forever, because they were afraid of what Nagash had done and afraid of the great rise of every single Tomb King that had ever lived, pretty much. And he brought them to heel. And then, sadly, Setra's great deeds come to not an end, but they come to a great brick wall, in that he never really has any long-term great success from this point forwards, because he doesn't conquer Araby, he doesn't conquer the Badlands, he doesn't conquer Bretonnia for anything longer than a few years at a go. Nothing really happens with him because he is used generally by most of the writers as a bad guy to be faced off against in times of woe. He, however, in the end times, I would argue, had some pretty freaking badass storylines. So contrary to most of my end time stuff, I quite like a lot of what they did with Setra, particularly how they resolved his endpoints. For all, it didn't turn out all that well for him. I will say that from my side, I really like his character. He shows that evil or bad guy doesn't necessarily need to be ravening lunatic, while simultaneously he is somewhat of a ravening lunatic. He manages to incorporate many different aspects of what we normally accept for our bad guy characters, while simultaneously being exceedingly good at what he does. It's just a little bit of a shame that he's never really given the through path at any point to actually properly succeed. It would be lovely, for example, if he significantly had expanded the land of the dead through the course of his long rule since he was brought back, but that hasn't really happened. So as a character, we as writers or as players of the game, we need to try and figure out why that's occurred. Has everyone else's power level just upped? So basically he's in a, I don't know, power uppageness, combat force, I don't know, competition as he attempts to outwit others who are equally growing more powerful. I think that you could argue that, but that's a relatively weak argument. You could argue that he's a known threat, so thus people try to stop him. Weak. What you have to effectively fall back on is it's his choice. That's the only thing that really works best for him.
What I do want to jump in that I like about the new Old World books is the Old World books focus a lot on when Setra comes back. They talk about like he does a lot of defensive fighting because they're like there's Waz and the whole crusades and a lot of really annoying invasions that he has to deal with. So he's doing a lot of defensive fighting. But one thing that I think the old world leans well into is that up until they add in that he does invade a couple times other parts of the world with his invasion of Sartosa.
I approve.
He's invaded Bretonia, which is great. But they also talk a lot that he's really obsessed with trying to restore Nehekhara, where he's been spending a lot of time really focusing on trying to get Nehekhara back into a shape where it's an actual empire.
3,000 years.
I know, it's a long time.
I mean,
working on that.
I could accept that as an excuse if we're looking at 500 perhaps, or 250. 250 is a long-term plan. But 3,000 years, it is a long time. It suggests that there is something else going on, perhaps a weakness that is not shared, perhaps a rise and a fall in how his power can manifest, perhaps something that should be written into the background to justify why Setra can't be the Setra that he is written as being. Because when he comes to the fore and he starts laying out with his, divine weaponry, he kicks ass and chews gum. Nagash, whatever, wallop. Who else in the entire Warhammer world can do that? Yeah. And the answer is not really many. Then why the hell hasn't he been more successful? And I think that's a super fun question to answer. I'm not raising this as a criticism. I agree. The opposite. Mm-hmm. I'm raising this as there's a bigger story here that almost certainly needs to be told. And I kind of hope that the old world drills into it. As I say, I've not read it yet. So every time Sotek says something, little snippet, I'm like, ooh, interesting, exciting. I'm super keen to see what they do with him and to see exactly where they develop. And I sorely hope he isn't just turned into, oh, look how powerful he is. He killed this person. Oh, and he's roundly defeated the end. Because that would be another disservice.
Hopefully they keep what he does in the 8th edition lore, because actually right after his war, because the War of the Border Princes was not in 8th edition. It's new, which is great and awesome. But pretty much immediately after the War of the Border Princes, Nehekhara actually, according to the old lore, in like the 2280s, gets invaded by a Norscan war host. Yeah. And they successfully fight their way towards Khemri, and Setra gets killed. Like, he gets in a big fight and he actually gets hit with a flaming weapon, hilariously.
But he gets one, as I recall.
Yes, he gets hit by a demonic flaming weapon and it kills him. Yeah. And Setra spends a while reforming. And then when he reforms, he invades Norska in the War of Snow.
10 years later, as I recall, he goes all the way
War
up
of Sand and the War of Sand and Snow, which is a fantastic war, because Setra literally goes from one side of Norska all the way to the other. And I really hope they do this storyline, because that means Setra would be busy during the old world. Yeah. Like, he invades Bretonia right after maybe he kills King Lewin Orkslayer. He gets word that because he's not in Nehekhara, it's invaded by Northern Warriors of Chaos. He goes, shit. He goes home. He dies while defeating them. They run home, and then he goes and invades Norska, because that's perfectly timed for, he fights his way across Norska. He wins a bunch of battles. He reclaims every single treasure he's lost. And that's just in time for Asvar Kul, where Asvar Kul kind of comes down, and Norska is really weak at this point. So they have to join or die, which, Andy, you're going to love the new Norska lore. They do such a good job of being like, yeah, they've got some chaos guys, but sometimes they unite to like fight against chaos.
Marvelous. That's
which is really fucking cool.
That's very much what we were drilling in when we did that.
So with it looks like it literally is the 2nd edition or a Warhammer Wolfrip lore. It's great. But anyway, so Setra invading Norska. I really hope they stick with that storyline, because that would do a really good setup for like,
it's a fun story, by the way.
Setra defeats the forces of chaos. Everyone's safe, and then here comes Kul, who takes advantage of Norska's weakness. That would be very, very cool for Setra to kind of play into the Great War Against Chaos without necessarily being directly involved in the fighting. Anyway, question time.
Do we have any? I thought we got an extra couple of comments there just before.
I think we did.
We go. Yes. Is that the first of them there?
Yes. Are there any other legendary lords with a stronger will than Setra? I would say maybe people tie him, but stronger than is a really... Setra's will is very heavily touched on multiple times as being kind of indomitable.
All right, so I'm going to say something relatively controversial.
Ooh,
we often have these conversations, both lightheartedly, as in, hey, Setra, what if we pitched him against Malorian Cathith, or whatever we want to call him?
Malarian Dread King.
Yes, the Dread King, Witch, Man,
Does
King,
not roll off the tongue
Phoenix,
as well, but whatever.
thing. So we often have these conversations, and there's a small part of me that thinks that questions like this are almost impossible to answer, but it's much easier to answer if we just generally pitch one against another. And I think that possibly we should do that in the future, have a few chats like that, because that would just be kick-ass chew gum and fun.
A who would win type scenario?
Who would win? Who would win? It reminds me of being a kid, because we used to do this all the time.
Yeah.
Because you've got stats on one hand, but then you've got the reality of their situation on the other. All stats might be really useful when you charge them, not so useful when you have an entire fucking kingdom at your back. So yeah, I think that could be quite fun.
Yep. But I mean, there are characters you could. It depends. It also kind of argues like how will is interpreted when it comes to non-human races.
Yeah.
I would say if you're dealing with men, the only person that has the strongest will of Setra is Sigmar.
I don't know. Sigmar wasn't that strong-willed. No, I mean it quite literally.
No, you're right. You're right.
Sigmar did not always succeed. Sigmar sometimes failed. He made mistakes. He was quite human.
You know, I would say Archaon.
One of the reasons he was so successful was because he rose above his failings, where in many respects, Setra believes he has no failings. And there's quite a different view there. You could argue Sigmar has a stronger will because he manages to see through the worst even when everything is terrible, where Setra at no point thinks he'll ever be defeated. It's pretty much as simple as that.
Yeah, that's actually super fair. But yeah, actually, now that I think about it, Ryan Woodall, I would probably say that Archaon has a very similar mindset to Setra, and it has a similar, like, his will is so boundless that he's able to accomplish things that really shouldn't be possible.
Yeah,
they're both very similar.
100% agree. Yeah, I 100% agree about that one, particularly because he's a character who's developed into that particular position. And that desperate will that he has, I think, is really quite extraordinary when it's seen manifested. He's never chosen for a reason. Love it.
And then Commander Bone with the most recent of it's a Hennesmet. The High Lich Priest who got put into a bone giant. Fun characters. There are a lot of the constructs are super fun. Funny enough, they actually don't play a lot into Setra's story because Setra died before constructs were really popularized. That happened with the rise of the Mortuary Cult because the constructs played a key role in the defeat of Nagash.
Super important, yeah.
Which is why I really don't like the Nagash trilogy, because it makes it seem like the guns defeated Nagash when it's not supposed to be that. It's the constructs that really defeat him. Super fun. All right, question time.
Thanks for that. Before we go into the questions, I have one thing that I'd like to say. At the end of the stream, we will reveal what we will be discussing next week, which I think will be a super fun one for everybody out there. So if you're thinking, is there any more Setra stuff? Should I move on? Really don't move on now, because next week's topic is going to be freaking awesome. But we'll get to that, and it will, to a degree, touch upon Setra also.
Yes, and we promise the week after that, we will do a vote again. I know there haven't been votes for a hot minute, but there's a lot happening right now, okay?
Yeah, there's lots of fun, exciting stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so Akuma King, considering how Nagash scares the Chaos Gods and Settra the Imperishable has the respect of Nagash, does this mean Settra the Imperishable can scare the Chaos Gods? I would say no, because he is a very different type of threat than Nagash is. If anything, Settra is something that I think the Chaos Gods would honestly exult in. Even if they can't necessarily corrupt him, what he represents, unless he were to genuinely go on like a world conquering escapade like he used to, and he started going up against the forces of chaos and being genuinely very successful, which is quite possible for him. But even then, I think that the Chaos Gods would more delight in Setra than they would fear him.
I 100% agree. Nagash is fundamentally different to Setra. Nagash is seeking to ascend to godhood. Setra is not. Setra may be a god king and often refers to himself amongst a bajillion other titles, as we discussed right at the beginning of this stream. But Setra is not there to challenge the ruinous powers themselves. He is there to bring control and authority to the world, which in many respects is an aspect of change, is an aspect of excess, is an aspect of despair for those that he faces, and is most certainly at its heart going to bring a lot of bloodshed. To the Chaos Gods, he is just yet another mortal who is exceedingly potentially useful to them if he would ever bend the knee, or alternatively, exceedingly useful just being himself.
Yeah. Let's see. Setra famously sacrificed his family for divine favor. Did he even love them at all in the first place? Setra probably has a very unique perspective on the concept of love, where I don't think Setra understands love like most people do. I think he would view it more as, in the sense that you or I would love someone, I don't think Setra was ever really capable of that, because he viewed himself as fundamentally above everyone else. And if you don't see things as your equal, you're not really going to love them. They're kind of pieces to be used in the grand scheme.
Yeah. That, I think, is the obvious answer and is almost certainly the correct answer. If you want to add depth or to try and add character or a different spin, there is multiple opportunities to do so here. For example, perhaps this was a sacrifice that was demanded by the gods and one he was not happy with. Perhaps there is a variety of feelings there that he had to overcome, and that overcoming was something that allowed him to become the man that he became. There are lots of different ways we could view this, but ultimately at its heart, Setra is repeatedly described as almost inhuman in terms of his morality. So it seems most likely he is some form of sociopath stroke psychopath, where he used them to get the outcome he wanted, or he just removed them as potential sources of, when he was young, just in 10 years' time, they could be warring against him. So remove that from the equation because he was young and paranoid. That's another way it could be viewed. The answer is we strictly don't know.
Yeah, but there are a lot of really fun different ways you could examine that.
Yeah.
Jan asks, would Setra let me hug him if I asked her respectfully? Definitely not. I would bet you $1 million Setra does not let people touch him at all. Like, I bet like servants are maybe allowed to in very strict ways, but Setra, if anything, Setra would probably be very particular about how you approach him. I do not think he would allow hugs. Funny enough. Who could defeat Setra in a fight and how? Future stream. Future stream. I don't know, probably Sigmar. Sigmar's got the plot hammer. He could probably do it.
I'm going to give a nothing answer here and say Setra will always be defeated by whomever is currently running the game requires him, or writing the novel requires him to be defeated by, for to make the best story.
It's such a boring answer.
It's a boring answer, but it is how he is often used as a character.
Yeah.
He is used as a character to show how hard somebody else is, or to show how weak they are, or to show what they are capable of doing. So sadly, Setra is always doomed to be defeated by someone.
Yeah. Which is why I really hope they actually pull not a fast one, but surprise us by bucking against that trend and have him win the War in the Border Princes, and then he has to go home because there's like something else going on. But like, I would be elated if he kills King Lewin and then is like, I won. Now I have to go deal with those Chaos Invaders. That would be fucking fantastic. And would be a far better representation of his character.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, Barkey did another super chat, which we really appreciate. Thank you so much, my dude. Love you guys. Love listening to you both on your separate channels. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Barkey. A3, you rock.
All right, real quick, rapid fire some questions here. If Alcazar was around, would he acknowledge Setra as the rightful king? What would happen? They would probably fight.
Rightful,
and that would be a hell of a fight, because Alcazar was kind of like Setra reborn.
You know, rightful king. I mean, what does that even mean? Nehek, is he the rightful king? Where is he? You know, that it's one of those questions that the answer is almost certainly going to be either at a table or on a battlefield.
Yeah, and knowing the both of them, it's probably going to be on a battlefield, or at least just because Setra. I don't think Setra would even allow the conversation to happen in the first place.
Yeah.
Let's see. If you have not already done so, oh yeah, okay, we already did all the titles. If Gelt made Setra a perfect golden body, would Setra declare him redeemed of his misdeeds? That's actually a really funny question. Setra
I refuse to answer it.
Setra just the answer is Setra's out there. Gelt's just out there casting what's final transmutation on all the Tomb Kings to make them happy. There, you got a gold body now. Shut up and go away. Let's see. What do you think the dragons of Cathay thought of Setra when he was alive? They had to know about. The dragons would have loathed Setra.
Yeah.
Setra is a megalomaniacal human who genuinely worships a pantheon of gods and wants to conquer all of creation. He is like the most arrogant, uppity, pain in the ass thing the dragons could possibly imagine.
He is the worst.
Like he's literally just disharmony. Like, but he's not chaos, but he's a very mundane form of disharmony. They would know.
Although, from his perspective, he considers himself to be nothing more than pure harmony. Things like the dragons are the problem.
Yeah, they would not get along, which would be super fun to watch.
Yeah.
Is there a known line Setra won't cross? The only thing I could possibly think of is that Setra seems to genuinely care about the Nehekharan gods, though he has very carefully arranged it in his head where he believes that anything he wants, they want, because he represents their interests. But I don't think he would ever try to get rid, like how Nagash is like, I want to kill the gods and destroy the gods. I don't think Setra would ever go to that point.
Yeah. The old, he's never going to be a slave to darkness thing. He's never going to say,
he would never serve anything.
He's exactly
Setra
that.
does not serve.
Setra does not serve. And I think that is a beautiful summation of the character in general. And I think speaks more to the gods that he does have a relationship with, to the gods that he denied there. And I think it's such a lovely line for the end times. And I say I quite like some of the end time choices that they made for him.
Yeah, literally, probably one of the best lines in the end times is the Setra does not serve. Setra rules, and then he gets ripped apart. Which, fitting, very fitting for him.
Super fitting.
Honestly, the only bad thing about his story is that he got put back together. Like, they should have just let him die. That should have just been the end of Setra right there, and that would have been a great story. It was very unnecessary to bring him back because they didn't do anything with him. Anyway,
no, they didn't.
Could you see Setra having his own personal Necrolith bone dragon mount? Not as a mount, more of just a great big monster he is lying around his throne room. It's not impossible, but the Chariot of the Gods represents something. It's not just that. There's Total War, in my opinion, has had a very annoying issue where it gets people to think that the biggest mount is the best mount, period, end of story. Like, oh, it's a big monster mount. It's the most effective. Therefore, every character should have a big monster mount. But you have to think about what the mounts represent. And the Chariot of the Gods, from a representation point, is infinitely more powerful than any construct could ever be.
Yeah. Agreed.
Especially because you have to think, the constructs are they're controlled by the souls of people, generally speaking. And for Setra, no one is, I don't think he would really view any construct as worthy of bearing him. It has to be a chariot of the gods themselves. Anything else is too inferior. Don't know if this has been answered yet. How do Setra and Khalida feel about each other? We actually have a couple of fun little notes about that. They're very minor notes, which is that Khalida is very good at playing to Setra's ego. Where she's High Queen Khalida. She is a big fucking deal, but Setra has wary respect of her. He knows she's dangerous, but he knows that she hates vampires to such an extent that their mutual hatred of Nagash and everything Nagash-ish binds them together.
Yeah.
Khalida is actually,
I was going to say, so I can sit back in that one.
Yeah. Khalida is strangely enough, Khalida is actually considered one of the genuine allies of Setra, because of their mutual hatred. Like when Setra invaded Sartosa, the big bad that went with him was Khalida. Because they're very eye to eye on all of those things. And Setra respects her title, which says a lot about how proficient she is. That Setra is like, yeah, she's good. Do we know what Setra thinks of Sigmar? No, we don't. Setra's probably never even heard of Sigmar, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I think there'd be an interesting conversation to be had there concerning divinity and what Sigmar becomes, and what
that would be a really good Black Library type thing.
Yeah, I think there's a lovely short story, 6K words, something like that, in there that could really relay home some of the issues with Nagash as well. I think there's something potentially beautiful in that one.
Yeah, that would be one. If they ever wanted to do a short story that shows Setra from from a more philosopher king angle, which I think he would be very capable of. Him listening to tales about Sigmar and like him comparing himself, Nagash, and Sigmar against one another would be a fascinating fucking story from Setra's perspective.
Agreed. Thanks for that one, Adam. Should Setra be the protagonist of Warhammer? Damn straight he should. He's the worst. For all I have tried to present Setra through the course of this in a fashion that brings up some of his good qualities as well as his exceedingly large number of negative ones. There is no way that we can't get away from the fact that he is the worst. He is not the sort of person that you would generally wish to have as a protagonist. He is very much the definition, if you wish to put it into black and white terms of good and evil, that most would lay on evil. A very lawful evil, an evil that brings control, order, and potentially deep prosperity, but nevertheless a true evil of the world.
Funny enough, when they released the like allegiance system, like the forces of good and the forces of evil for fantasy, and they were like, oh yeah, the Tomb Kings are evil now because it's the Tomb Kings of Khemri specifically. A lot of people were like, Tomb Kings are neutral. It's like, no, Setra's not neutral. Like, honestly, Setra deserves to be evil more than the orcs and goblins deserve to be evil. Like, he is an evil motherfucker.
Goblins aren't evil. Oh man.
Jonathan Scott, when I was king, I was the greatest king, the best king you've ever seen. Now I need to be king again, folks. Together we can make Nehekhara great again. God, please no. Please no Setra Trump.
Hey, actually got things
done. Different topic, but with how much dwarves are traditionalists, how do they have gunpowder?
Oh, that is a different topic. Oh, wow.
That's a super different topic.
Huge one, too.
I'm just gonna say their ancestors figured it out. The beginnings of it are from their ancestors. And they took it, and
that's a good summary.
It's a whole thing. Go watch our Slayer stream. We actually talk about a lot of aspects of traditionalism within dwarf culture, and that'll hopefully answer some questions.
Yeah, that was quite a good one too. We've got a couple more left there.
We already answered that. No.
Yes, we did. Brilbo Baggins.
Setra does not serve, but I shall tip. Just starting now, decided to catch up. Thank you, Baggins.
Thank you, Brilbo. You super appreciated. Also appreciated from Mr. Pig.
I still remember the tournament where the Chariot of the Gods faced off against Kolek. Oh, was that a tournament you played in? Because I will say, Setra versus Kolek on tabletop is super fun because it basically kind of comes down to Setra makes that 4-up ward. Because if he does, he'll body Kolek. but Kolek, that D6 multi-wounds, really fucking scary.
Okay. And we're done. Back to the questions.
Yeah, back to quick questions.
Thank you very much, everyone.
What is Setra's theme song? I assume he has a whole orchestra playing as Nekaph speaks all of his titles. Ooh, gosh.
Walk like an Egyptian. I'm sorry.
Come on. I would say whatever your favorite boss theme from fucking like Dark Souls is would probably fit Setra quite well. Just like full choir. Though taking a genuine Egyptian flair on it while keeping that level of epicness, which we don't tend to get a lot of, would actually be really fun for him. But it would probably be something really over the top. Setra likes extravagance. That is his like big thing. Of Setra's collection of magic, awesome magic items, which is the strongest? The Scarab Brooch. Not even close. The Scarab Brooch is literally one of the strongest magic items in Warhammer Fantasy.
I'm going to say brooch.
Sorry, brooch.
Thank you. I had to broach that. Anyway.
But it's got 2 O's.
I know. English is a fine language. It always
Approach
makes
has
sense.
an A, so why is it not brooch anyway? But yeah, no, the scare of brooch is insane. Like anything that basically just looks at magic and goes nope is like that is you're basically looking at the power of gods and the power of warping reality and saying yeah no, which is bonkers. Anyway, if Setra had defeated Nagash in the end times, would the world have been saved? No, if anything, I think that actually would have made things worse. Funny enough. Because Setra, I don't think would have been able to capitalize on the whole like wind of death thing. And Setra also, as weird as it may sound, Setra would not have been as compromising as Nagash was. Because Setra would have cared too much about himself than the grander picture. Whereas Nagash was, I will do whatever it takes to defeat the dark gods because then, I can backstab everybody later. Setra would not have been able to meet with the other incarnates as equals, which would have been critical.
He is not a collegiate man. He does not work with others. He rules others. And if others don't accept his rule, and let's be fair, some of them would not have accepted his rule, there would have been big problems.
And plus, Setra wouldn't have been able to unite the undead. Like, he would have looked at vampires and just been like, all right, spawn in Nagash, time for you to die. Let's see. Do you think Setra will make it back home in time to be chopped up by the Norseman warlord in the old world, or do I think they're going to change the War of Sand and Snow? Side pedals, I hope he makes it home. I do think they might have to change the dates around because it's kind of tight right now. But I hope they still do it, but I'd be fine with them backing it up maybe 10 years or 5 years or whatever. It doesn't have to happen at the exact same time because they actually are trying pretty hard with the timeline now, which is pretty cool to see.
It is. And the timeline is there as a tool. It shouldn't be seen as something that they have to follow directly because it's nothing more than a perception of history. And there are great events in there that everyone will expect. And if they're not used, that will be seen as a disappointment, but it won't be seen as a surprise by many. But I would very much like to see that.
Yeah. Plus, it would be the perfect way to let Setra be Setra while also then getting him off the, like, focusing the story elsewhere.
Yeah, it means Setra's biggest issue is that he is a very big pair of boots on a very small map wherever he goes. And the only way to get rid of those very big pair of boots is to either get someone else that's bigger, which is normally how Warhammer does it, or alternatively, to have those big boots move somewhere else. And I think it would be nice for a change for them not to simply say, aha! And this person comes along and sorts out some Setra, shows them what for. Oh, thank goodness for that person. The forces of good have won the day. Oh. That would be, I think, weak.
It would be much better for Setra's story to establish that, and many times in history, he has gone out and started conquering, but then inevitably the land of the dead gets invaded again, and it's just not able to protect itself, so he keeps having to go back home. And that's why he hasn't expanded very much. No was one of the first Total War ever chosen, if I recall correctly. What?
I'm not quite sure what that's in regard to.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pig. Did we miss something there? Please?
Oh, no. Okay. He's talking about, there was a Total War Warhammer tournament where Setra first won a chariot, fought Kolak Suneater. And that was, yes. I do remember that. That was a very fun, the tournament was called the Everchosen Tournament. Yes, I remember that. It was a great fight. Setra won. It was great. Dragon Emperor and Setra meet, egos reaching critical mass. Yeah. Like basically a god that thinks gods are dumb, meaning a man who basically considers himself a god. Not going to be great.
Or arguably a man who is supported by the gods. I think that makes for a better meeting. That's quite fun,
That's true.
Even
more spicy.
It makes it more spicy. I quite like that.
All right. Do I think Setra and Vlad would hate each other, or is there room for mutual respect? That would be an interesting dynamic, especially because Vlad or Vashanesh is also a descendant of Setra. So I don't think they would have an interesting relationship. Vlad is very clever in a different kind of way. Like, Vlad knows how to play to people, which is how he took advantage of Otto von Drack. So I don't know what Vlad would do, but Vlad is diplomatic enough. He could probably pull off dealing with Setra.
Yeah, you just get a feeling that Setra would start it would start off bad.
Yeah, it would start off very negative because Setra's
really negative. And
of Nagash stuff is
and would Vashnesh be able to turn that round? I think of anyone, he's definitely one of the ones who could. But I think it would start off pretty bad.
I think he's the only vampire that would have a chance of getting Setra to come to a chat. I don't think he'd have a great chance, but he's the only one that would even stand a chance. Which titles of Setra are my favorite? I think my personal favorite title, oh gosh, like he has a lot of really good ones, but my personal favorite as far as like, because you have to think that each of them has a story behind it, right? It's not just like a random epithet. It's probably like, oh, there's a reason he's called this. I mean, the funniest one is the Begetter of the Begat. That's a stupid title, but it's funny.
No, I quite like that one.
The one that I think would make for the most interesting story would probably, I think for me would probably be the Father of Hawks. I know what it's referring to, but I would like to hear the story behind when he picked that one up. Also, the Mighty Lion, the Infinite Desert. That's just a great one. It's fucking.
Oh, damn it! I was about to say that one was quite fun. I was just looking at it. There was like,
beat him.
I'll just hang my head in shame at this side. Yeah, whatever. You go.
Let's see. Then we've got. Okay, we're doing pretty good here. Does Setra see himself as a servant of the gods?
I think this is a really good question. I think the answer is definitively no, because he serves no one.
Yeah.
What he sees himself as is a representative of the gods. He is basically the summation of everything that they want. His action and his deeds are divine. He is a god king. He is not representing others as in, oh, they're working through me. He is the one that matters. So no, he doesn't see himself as a servant of the gods. You could argue allies, but I think in many respects, even that is a little bit too basic, a little bit too simple in terms of how he would perceive it.
Yeah, Setra is definitely the kind of guy that like would make sure, like, tell his armies, make sure you pray to the gods, but I don't think he himself would do it, if that makes sense. He would just be like, no, they know what I wish, and they will back me up. That is our relationship.
It'll be interesting to see how that develops, because given that there is a strength of a wealth of potential content coming up for him, we might find that this adapts as we move through. Because
his relationship could change.
I'll be interested to see where this lands.
Yeah, the version they run with in Total War, a lot of his dialogue, he's kind of clever about how he talks in Total War, where he basically does what he wants to do and basically proclaims that it's in the glory of the gods, but he's doing it anyway.
That seems to match his character perfectly.
Yeah. Who in the modern era could face Setra in a duel and potentially win? A fair number of characters, but like because of the Scarab Brooch, he is pretty anti-wizard. Like a lot of the characters that you'd be like, oh, this character like would body slam him into the ground. He would actually probably be very, very dangerous too. But like, your big similar characters like Krokar, Malekith, who's now called Malarian, Tyrion could put up a good fight against him. If Karl Franz has all of his goodies, he might be able to put up a fight, though. That'd be hard for Franz.
Nah, Karl Franz is going down.
Yeah, the Green Knight would be a pretty interesting opponent for him. Archaon, Kolak Sun Eater. You're really, really big guys. You're big boys who are, been fighting for hundreds or thousands of years and stuff like that. Are living descendants, Setra, still around the old world? Oh yeah, definitely, 100%.
As I said earlier, he's probably significantly more prolific than many would believe.
He's probably the Warhammer World's version of Genghis Khan, where like a hilarious percentage of the world can draw their lineage back to him.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Let's see. Would I want a new Setra mini to look like his Total War interpretation, or is there another version I'd like GW to use? I love the Total War interpretation, but that one would be fine. I would love to see it spiced up maybe a little more. There's a couple of art depictions of Setra that are beautiful, that were very far beyond the capabilities of modeling when they were made. Any of those would be very nice. Just something that justifies him being on a 100 by 150 millimeter base, which is fucking huge. Like, fill it up. I want that base to be, I want him to be like big on that base.
Given the way that the models are being sculpted today, I would expect something particularly impressive for someone like Setra. And if I didn't get that, I would be almost certainly sorely disappointed, even if the model was good. This is someone who deserves a model.
Yeah, like his old model, it's fine. It, you know, it hasn't aged super great, more because of the horses than anything else. Like, Setra himself is actually okay.
Yeah, he's fine.
But yeah, no, I would definitely love for him to get a new mini. Especially because I like that Tomb Kings, as GW has developed more of them, they're more fleshy, which they should be. They're mummies. They're supposed to look kind of preserved. Old Setra is a little skeletal for my liking. Anyway, do I think Setra will be in the new Bretonnia model? I think he will appear in kind of like an epilogue. I don't think he's going to feature heavily in the novel, because we know it's more about King Septet, which is like one of his big lieutenants. So I suspect Setra will make an appearance, but I don't think he will feature heavily in the story. Can Setra take on Croak if magic doesn't work? Honestly, yes.
Yeah. As ridiculous as it sounds, yeah, very possibly.
And like, Croak's flammable, and he has a big flaming halberd weapon. Yeah, he'd be a problem for Croak. Which, oh man, next week we're gonna talk about the new Croak Lord. The new Croak Lord is really interesting.
Oh, really? Next week, are we talking about something in particular?
I thought we were doing changes to the old world next week.
Are we? We haven't said so.
Oh.
So maybe we should say.
Hey, next week we're doing changes to the old world.
So, as you may have noted at the very beginning of the stream, we have definitely got big box sets full of gorgeous stuff that we're currently pouring through at a ridiculous pace. We have books to read, we have things to look at, and we have miniatures to be all googly-eyed about. And we thought it'd be super fun because it's all fresh in our minds. We're all getting our models just now. For those of us at home who are collecting them, for those of us who are buying the books, you're getting your books just now, and we thought it'd be super fun to dive through all of them and take a look at the changes that have been installed between the Lord, the obvious parts, some of them perhaps the less obvious parts. So, for example, just the other day we were having a discussion about some of the changes on the maps.
Yeah,
and why
you're looking at the maps.
Yeah,
the timeline, all of the little like paragraphs and notes and stuff. Man, you cannot wait for the map talk with Andy. It is a spicy one.
I obviously have opinions, having done many a map in my time for Warhammer. So it's
what's this? Why is this here? Where is this place gone? That's not where that is.
Where is Kypris if you have the Kyprian road? Just can't help myself. While simultaneously, I love seeing the changes, because the changes bring new lore, bring new backgrounds, bring new stories, and that's what we're all here for. So I figured, after seeing that and us having our discussions, that it would be a nice idea. Fortunately, we're all in agreement on that one. I think, was it me brought? Well, maybe it was you that brought it up first.
No, it was you that brought it up.
It was me that brought it up first.
Yeah,
can't remember. Yeah, we brought it up first. That'll do for me. And I'm super looking forward to that, because I love looking at how lore changes, because it's often done for a good reason. It's often done because nobody realized there was an old lore. It's often done just because it made the best sense for the game at hand, and it's fun to pick through it all and go, "Oh, that's nice. Wonder why they did that." And really? They did that when they had something else? Interesting choice.
Yeah,
it may get spicy. We'll find out. I've still not read it.
Yeah, and yeah, there's some interesting new factions in the world as well, which will be something to talk about.
You may have noticed Lindsay's comment there. For those of you who don't know Lindsay, Lindsay is my wife, and she has written many a Warhammer piece of lore in her time, and is also in our LAWhammer streams. And Lindsay has a lot of opinions on some of the Bretonnian names, some of which she doesn't just hate, she despises with a passion that is hotter than the burning blade of Setra. Such is her incandescent fury over a couple of syllables. But yes, she's rather upset by some of the naming of the Bretonnians.
Let's see. Sir Elder Scrolls, what did Setra think of King Alcadazar? We don't know. Doesn't ever really seem to get brought up. It's likely that he was told about Alcatrazar when he was kind of being caught up on everything that happened with Nagash. I imagine he was probably relatively proud of his descendant, but we don't get his perspective on it.
Yep, agreed. And I agree with that entirely. I imagine upon hearing it and everything that he did, he'll have gone, my man, well done. That is how you fucking kick Nagash.
He probably would have been like, I wish I could have done it myself.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
wish I could have killed Nagash myself. Sir Beardington, is there any other rule in their setting, alive or dead, to have earned Setra's respect or recognition? I don't know about respect, but he probably had an interesting view on like the High King of the Dwarves. He probably was like, all right. You know, they got wealth, they got power. I don't want to mess with them because the dwarves were in their golden era at the time.
Yeah.
But we don't have any specifics.
I think it's also very likely there were strong elven relationships that have yet to be properly delved into.
Yep. Let's see. If I recall correctly, Nehekharans were taller than the average human. How tall is Setra? So that's another one of the carryovers from the Nagash series. The Nagash trilogy paints Nehekharans as like superhumans, which they're not. Because if they were, their skeletons would like tower above everyone else, and they don't. I would say that's one author's attempt to try and make Nehekhara more magical than it needed to be. Maybe on average, they might have been a little bigger. I would suspect that's probably not the case. Usually the humans in the north are bigger. And hell, like Herald Nekaph is massive compared to Nehekharans. And he's from like Norska type cultures. So no, I don't really think they're that tall. Really, like some of them were, like Setra was a big guy, but like the vast majority of the Nehekharans were probably just average.
I think that's probably fair. I mean, in everybody's own culture, they've got things that they say are the best about said culture, and perhaps that was just one of the things that they themselves plucked upon, in comparison to perhaps some other historical people who were also very large that they were trying to outshine. You can bring some lovely potential stories out of it, but do I think it's an actual real world fact? Given the evidence we have so far, it looks like it's a novel fact rather than a Warhammer world staple that we have to stick by.
Yeah, it just kind of feels silly to be like, oh, they were so much taller and grander than regular humans. No, they're supposed to be just people. That's the point of the story. Like the kings and queens were great and mighty, but like the regular soldiers weren't anything super crazy. Otherwise, they wouldn't be like strength 3, toughness 3, weapon skill 2. You know? All right. Real quick here. If given the chance, would Setra... If your question starts with, would Setra invade? The answer is yes. I don't need to finish it. The answer is yes.
That was easy.
Yeah. Could Setra have another family after the one he sacrificed? He almost surely did.
I just have to bring up that comic because it made me laugh.
Just giant heads on their little bodies. Yeah. Yeah, good old skeleton sculpts.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, they're not the best.
What is Setra's tomb made out of? White marble. And because okay, you said something about gold and jade being great with magic. Is it a similar material? Is what Nagash's tomb black gold? So it's worth noting, Setra's tomb was not built with the intention of magical anything. The Nehekharans had a not great understanding of magic at the time. They were still building it up. And Setra's pyramid was meant to be grandiose, glorious, clean, and beautiful. And it's got like a gold cap on the top.
Yeah, it's a classic Egyptian pyramid in terms of what it would look like with its polished limestone and capped at the top of the pyramid in of gold. Yeah. With Nagash being the opposite.
Nagash made an arcane fulcrum. Yeah. Like Setra's was, I'm gonna die. I want to hang out. My death thing should be the prettiest fucking building on earth to show how awesome I am. Nagash's was, I want to draw in the winds of magic. So it had a purpose.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to dismiss Setra's pyramid too much. I mean, it was to serve a purpose of a particular type also in the afterlife.
Yeah, just not of a magical nature.
But it's a completely different setup. It is entirely divinely inspired, where the alternative side is entirely arcanely inspired, particularly.
That's a fair way. Yeah, that's a good way to play it. Like Setra's pyramid, if you ever like went inside, which, oh man, if they did a Woofert thing, that'd be so cool if you could go in Setra's pyramid, would be like full of fucking like all the god things you could possibly imagine, like sacred relics, caskets of souls, Ushabti, probably much larger constructs than you would think. Setra versus the Crown of Sorcery.
Oh, Spanuri, I love that one.
That would be a really fucking fascinating story.
I think that would make a beautiful story. And I think
Setra would not resist it, or like he wouldn't be able to resist putting it on. As far as what happens after that, that would be a crazy fucking story.
Yeah, it'd be a really good story. And I think that answering it in many respects diminishes the cool story that you could have. I mean, sure, you could sum it up with a pithy, well, Setra's will and stuff, or Nagash infiltrates and stuff. But the actual story itself, I think, would be that we're the winners if anyone ever wrote that, because it would be pretty goddamn awesome.
Yep. Setra prolonged his lifespan with the Mortuary Cult, but when did he? So most sources that I've read, including the new Old World stuff, seem to be heavily insinuating that Setra doesn't learn magic until after he's resurrected. They seem to very heavily imply that he specifically learns the Mortuary Cult stuff because of the whole needing to resurrect soldiers in order to have soldiers thing, which means that he does it after he's already undead, not before.
Yep. That is fair.
Why didn't Nagash destroy Setra's tomb or any of the other tombs when he was building his own tomb? Because Nagash is still Nehekharan. That's still Nagash's culture. You have to remember Nagash until very, very late was still a person who had pride in who he was, his ancestry. He was of royal blood. He's a direct descendant of Setra. In a lot of cases, Nagash probably looked up to Setra very, very much and idolized him in many ways.
Can you say the question one more time? Because I didn't quite catch it, I think.
So he asked, why, when Nagash was ruling over Khemri, why didn't he just destroy Setra's tomb and all of the other Tomb King's tombs?
Why would be the better question.
Yeah, like there'd be no reason for him to do it, is the real thing.
He's the king. To do that would be beyond sacrilegious. I think that would be quite beyond any of his considerations or thoughts at that point, at least.
Yeah, plus his goal would be to dominate them, not destroy them. He would not realize what a threat they were until Setra was already undead and awake, and by then Nagash couldn't even get into the city.
As it turns out, they weren't really a threat. If he could have seen his spell through, Nagash would have won by controlling them all. It's just he got disrupted by some people who wanted him to die.
Yeah. Why didn't Nagash vehemently pursue the preservation of his body? Wait, what? So Nagash, if you're asking why didn't Nagash didn't really do that. Okay, so if you're asking about Nagash specifically, which I'm going to assume because it seems like you intentionally asked about Nagash, the thing about Nagash, he did not give a shit what he looked like. Nagash only cared about fitting as much power into his body as he physically could, which made him look pretty horrific. But like, if he had made a body, implemented gold into his body, it would not have made him stronger. He took the optimal route to power. It's just that the optimal route looks fucking hideous.
Yep. Yeah, he had gone past such mortal concerns. It just wasn't an issue to him anymore. From Ledger there, Light College and Nehekhara connections. I think that is a fascinating question, which is going to take far too long to sum up in a Setra stream because that's more general. But I will say that the connections there are deep. The connections there are tied directly through to a great deal, many different magical practices.
Go watch our Winds of Magic stream.
The influences of Nehekhara on later magic practice. So loosely, go watch that other stream. That'll give you some insight, but there is much that could be discussed there.
All right, I'm just going to blast through the last one of these because a lot of these we've already answered. So if you don't hear me ask your question, it's because we've already said something that basically answers it. So
sounds good.
Do forgive me. Oh, okay. That's actually a really cool question from Elder Scrolls. Why didn't Setra ever consider the option of going construct route and having his soul put into some kind of construct? And the reason is because mostly arrogance, and Setra wants his own body. The Tomb Kings being put into a construct, you really don't want that. It seems to be kind of tied in with some kind of negative connotations where it can happen. It can be done. Like Khemric Titans are said to have entire dynasties sometimes entombed within them. But for most of the Tomb Kings, they had a promise of their own bodies. And you have to remember that being put in a construct probably means you miss out on any sensations at all. It's probably a very dry existence.
Yeah. No, he's Setra. He's not a construct. I mean, it goes against not only much of the characters were presented, but it also culturally would be difficult, I think. The idea of transfer, no, he's Setra. No.
Yeah.
I think no is the answer to that one.
Yeah, potato salad. Could Setra, could Setra have become a god like Sigmar did? Who knows? That's a really fun question, but who knows? I don't think he would have ever thought of it. Because I mean, you have to remember, Sigmar didn't think of it. It was somebody else that made Sigmar a god. Technically,
that is a super interesting question that can only be answered in truth by answering what is the Nehekharan gods, what are they, what do they represent, what are their gods, and that in turn then answers what Setra considers for his gods as well. I think the answer is probably, given the nature of how their religion manifests, no. Nagash went beyond Nehekharan culture and went in a completely different he was basically a book burner, a temple burner. He went in a completely different direction to what his culture demanded. And that was all in the pursuit of ascension, ultimately. Where Setra was quite the opposite. In fact, it would be very easy to make a reading of Setra where he's a devout and religious man who very much believes he is a representation of the gods, not someone who could become a god. That is beyond his consideration. Gods are just a different thing. As well say, I will become a mountain. As well say, I will become the sea. No, I won't become the sea because I'm bloody Setra. That's who I am, representative of the gods, doing my thing. So,
yeah, there's kind of a funny thing of that. His arrogance is at such a level that I don't think he could consider himself becoming a god, because that would imply he would have to become something grerer than he already is.
Yeah. He's already at the
he would be like, no, that's ridiculous.
I mean, in the pyramid scheme, he's at the top already. Now, the gods may have made the pyramid scheme, but he's at the top of the pyramid scheme. So, yeah, I don't think he sees himself as leaving the pyramid, so to speak.
Would Setra had drank the elixir of life? Yes, he would have. Absolutely. Without hesitation.
Yeah, damn straight. He'd been all over that bad boy.
Yeah.
This was making me laugh a lot, Phil.
Yeah, the really big Nehekharans were used for the swimming school catapults. Yeah.
Here's the top one.
We use the 5-inch template for these guys. They had birth defects. But yeah, no, Setra would have done, if there had been any route to immortality available, he would have taken it, no matter what it was.
Yeah, particularly in his later years. He'd have been all over it like a rat.
Yep. Total War, Setra has the diplomacy line of, you speak with Setra, King of Kings, know that you are not worthy. Is he saying I'm not worthy of being in his presence? Yes. Like, you are witnessing something you are unworthy of witnessing, much less being spoken to.
Yeah. I mean, he considers himself beyond anyone else's petty concerns or gods or consideration. Damn straight. They're not worthy.
Oh, here's a fun question. How safe or dangerous would it have been for a diplomat to meet with Setra? Super fucking dangerous.
I don't know.
Unless there was like a really specific cultural taboo about harding diplomats. Which, granted, Setra is actually usually pretty good about diplomats, actually.
Okay. Given the danger that comes with unbalanced diplomacy, and it's enormous danger as well. There's reasons we have rules around diplomacy, because those who break those rules are shunned completely. And he clearly has made alliances in the past. He has clearly made agreements, and that would not come around if he was deeply unreliable when it comes to sending representatives to him. I think in his position as a just, able ruler in his own head, if not in any of his people's head, then I think that he would, as long as they were respectful and as long as they did the right thing, according to whatever the cultural mores or situations are, he'd probably be fine, almost entirely safe, in fact. But I think if you were foolish, said something out of place, did something wrong, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because not only do you potentially receive the repercussions for this, but far more likely he's going to send you back saying that your entire people are going to receive the repercussions for your actions. So the danger that lies here is not the danger to your own body and your own soul. It's the danger to all of your people, to everybody you know, to everybody you love. If you arrive to him as an ambassador, you're not just representing yourself, and it's not just your life that matters. It's literally everyone you've ever known, and that is where I think the true danger lies. So how dangerous is it? Enormously. But personally, I'm not so sure he's necessarily the person that you should be most worried about dying, well, killing someone in that direct instance.
Really, if you were in a throne room with Setra, the person you probably really need to watch out for is Nekaph. Because Nekaph has a whole thing about like Setra's honor is like his number one priority.
Got to do it right.
And there's stories about him killing people that like don't respect Setra properly.
Quite. And I think that any proper ambassador, anyone coming from any of the larger, more established...
You'd research the rules.
They will do everything correctly. So they are, broadly speaking, going to be safe unless they're there to threaten him. And if that's the case, then on your own head, be it, you idiot.
Yeah, moron.
Yeah, they're just not a wise idea.
Do either of you, Great Fate asked, do either of you think there's room to add a harder satirical edge to Setra and the Tomb Kings? Or do you think the original satirical nature of Warhammer should be toned down for the old world? No,
I do not think any satire should be toned down for the old world. I think
I think they should just try to embrace what Warhammer's kind of made. Fantasy has held on to its satire much better than all the other settings.
And to lose it would be to make some rather uncomfortable choices. When you start celebrating people who are not worth celebrating, when you start demonizing people who should not necessarily be demonized purely because they come from a different culture and thus must be wiped out. There is lots of issues with losing satire when it comes to something that is so bleak and dark as a potential setting. So I would generally say that yes, clever writing with a satirical edge and an intelligent hand is going to be much better than just writing Warhammer because it's Warhammery in it.
Yeah, because otherwise we end up like a different type of setting that is published by the same company. Jiggy, did Setra's reign have diplomatic foreign policy? Yes. Did Setra endorse exploration to find more possible? Setra was, like I said, willing to do anything for immortality. Rumors, myths of like, the whole like bullshit about like, a fountain of youth and this place gives you eternal life if you bathe in this pond. Like he would have been sending people to check out every fucking little scrap of myth. Especially as he got older. Why didn't Nagash? We've already kind of talked about all these. How did Setra break the ogre clans? Through sheer violence, because he's fucking Setra. And to be fair, ogres respect violence. That is not a bad way to deal with them. There's a reason their bosses are called tyrants.
There's not much eating on a skeleton.
Yeah. But bone meal, I think I remember there being a joke about an entire ogre tribe going to the Charnel Valley because they want to get bone meal to make bread. It doesn't go well for them. Let's see. We've already answered all that. This is such a cool question. I don't think we really have time for it, but the German asks, how would romance work in Nehekhara or Tomb King society? As the highest rank. He actually is asking about, this is an even better question. So he's talking about Tomb King specifically. So after death, as the highest rank still have all their personalities, I can see them falling in love and having other kinds of relationships, but certainly there would be difficulties.
Right. So I disagree. And this may come as somewhat of a surprise. Our intellect is quite different to our body. Our body is driven by various urges and drives. We need to eat. We need to drink. We need to have sex. We need to form various types of relationships, even when it's perhaps against our good and better nature. We are driven by our biology. When you remove that biology, we are something completely different. Now, are some of them still going to be passionate, angry, this, that, and the other? Obviously, yes. But all of the biological drives that were pushing you forward are no longer there if you are a skeleton or a mummy, probably. Now, does that mean that they will necessarily be written that way? Not necessarily. Vampires, they still have so much of their bodily functions in place. And as we know, they are creatures of thirst. They are creatures of need. They are creatures of lust in a variety of ways. That is not the case for our good old mummies, for want of a better description. They are dead. They've got all of their intellect, they've got all of their past, but the needs that they once had no longer exist, and are probably somewhat shriveled away in more ways than one. So I would argue that if you want to keep them interesting, please dial into the differences rather than trying to make them the same as everybody else, because that makes the different cultures much more fascinating. And in many respects, it makes the Tomb Kings alien, difficult to deal with, and very difficult to understand for the other species who are all deeply biological. And that's fun. Those differences and dialing into them is what makes the setting fun. So I would loosely suggest I would prefer an angle where there was more focus on differences rather than trying to make everyone the same.
That being said, there are like one of my favorite examples that fits with what Andy was saying is if you ever read The Serpent Queen, which is a Gotrek Phoenix novel, there is a Tomb Herald character who she's hilarious because she, after seeing Felix fight, interacting with Felix, she often makes comments something along the lines of like, if I was still alive, due to your fighting prowess and your skill at arms and tactics, you would make a worthy mate, and we should do that. And Gotrek's always like, you should do something with that. And he's like, she's dead. And she's like, yeah, no, I can't, obviously I'm dead, so there's no point, and I don't really feel it anymore. But if I was alive, this would make for a acceptable match, which is, she's very analytical about it, which is a very funny comment.
I love that. And it's also deep humor. And Gotrek and Felix, as we all know, is often dialing down onto the humor for the fun. But yeah, I love that.
What I would say is it would be very fun to explore the Tomb Kings who feel that culturally there should still be romance and there should still be all those things, even though they don't really feel it anymore. But they're just holding on to like remnants of what it was like to be human.
Like the tattered remnants of the very clothes they wear. Exactly. That sort of fun is what really brings these sorts of cultures to life. Trying to imagine a completely alien situation with a new alien mindset, but it is ultimately, in the case of this group of people, human in source. Much like the vampires are human in source, but they have come out in a very different place. And analyzing those differences is what makes those characters so much fun.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is some of the older army books had some actually really fun little lines about some of the Tomb Kings handle undeath better than others. Yes, intellectual. Yeah, that would. Yeah,
absolutely.
Khalidah's a really good character to look into for that. Khalida has some really interesting dynamics.
And also there'll be some who will hate their new existence because they will have reveled in their existence before. There'll be others that much prefer their new existence. Some who will believe that their love is now pure because it's based upon what they definitely feel rather than the drives of their filthy bodies that used to push them in one direction or another. There's all manner of different characters that you can drag out of this interesting situation, and then add the weight of age for some of them who may have been alive for a few centuries or perhaps even longer. It just makes for fascinating people rather than just yet more people who are identical to the last set of characters that you met.
Yeah, like the last thing I'll say on that is in the old lore, one of my favorite notes is there are some Tomb Kings that handle being undead so badly that they've kind of gone mad, and they basically act as if they're still alive because that brings them comfort to where they still eat food and they drink wine and stuff, even though it has no effect. They can't taste it or anything. They just go through the motions because it makes them feel better.
And that's awesome. As I say, it's looking at how it affects the psyche in so many different ways. That would make them fascinating.
The Dragonman, all this to say, Settra x Nekaph. Honestly, Setra does not feel like a person that engaged in that kind of activity other than for a purpose, but who knows? Maybe him and Nekaph are getting it on behind the scenes. Who's to say? What was life under Setra when he was alive? Surprisingly peaceful in a lot of places. Like, good. It was good as long as you didn't break the law or screw up. Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as you were part of the machine, it was probably quite nice. If you were on the lower rungs of that machine or you bucked against it was probably not a great time.
No.
Okay, last couple questions here. If Nagash, no, we already talked about that.
We've got a couple of left over here too.
Is Setra a slave of the Nehekharan gods, or the Nehekharan gods the slaves of Setra?
I loved answering such questions with the elven answer. Yes.
As unsatisfying as that may feel, that is the correct answer to this particular question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Hey, Adam. If Andy could write new lore, what would he like to tackle? I'm quite happy sitting on the outside watching in for a change. It's really nice. I haven't done this for a long time. Following a new set of releases.
No. He would write the lore of Khepris because it needs to be on the map.
Fucking right, I would. I'd be right on fucking Khepris. Okay, no, stop. Khepris. No, I would. I don't know. I'm going to have to go through everything that the book presents first. I purposely avoided reading it. I've got it sitting down there, as we already mentioned. I'm going to go through the core rulebook first, because that's what we're going to be discussing next week. And then after I've done that, I'll go through everything else that there is. And almost certainly through the course of that, I will find some things that I'll go, wow, I really wouldn't mind getting my teeth into that. I might even adapt some of it and move it into my own games, because we can't help ourselves. You see cool shit and you want to use it. So the answer is, I don't know yet. Oh, there's another one there from Still Loading.
Tomb King's boning sounds like a horse trotting on wood. Thank you for that, Still Loading. Appreciate it.
That's an image I'm not going to lose.
Let's see. If Nagash raised everyone to ever die in Nehekhara, does that mean Setra's original family was kicking about somewhere in the background? Not impossible.
Little kids going, thanks, Dad.
Yeah, honestly, not impossible. Would they have been resentful for him sacrificing them?
Harsh.
Probably. Harsh. But who knows? It's hard to say how they would have felt about it, because there is probably a lot of honor, honestly, in that. As fucked up as we may see it being. It's hard to say how it would have looked from their perspective.
Different cultures respond to things in different ways.
Let's see. What is Tomb King power ranking as a faction compared to other Warhammer factions? That's such a bitch to figure out. Like, all the Warhammer factions are vaguely equal if you really want to dial it down, in my opinion. They all have their strengths and weaknesses.
The newest one's the best.
Yeah, whoever got the most recent army book. But so I don't really have an answer for you on that, because it depends on so many factors. So many factors.
It does. And also who's playing.
Yeah. Let's see. I'd imagine at least one of the dragon children would have met Setra if Cathay had an alliance. I actually really doubt it. I doubt any of the dragon children would have ventured to Nehekhara as diplomats. They would have sent somebody else like Shukenguns, and Setra would have never done a diplomatic mission to there. Never. Not in a million years. Setra would never lower himself to being a diplomat.
No, himself go no.
Yeah, no, he'd send other people, yeah, sure. But yeah, no,
I don't require a very special situation for the meeting to occur.
Yeah, I don't think they'll write it as they had ever met, because it would be a very weird set of circumstances, especially because the dragon kids are, like, most of them are gone anyway. Not most of them. Less than half. Barely less than half.
Schwartz AJ, is there anything in the lore for Tomb Kings bigger than a bone dragon? Something approaching Tamarkan's size or larger?
Do you mean like an actual Tomb King? Like a person?
Or do you mean like all of them as a whole?
Like there are constructs bigger than the bone dragons. Like the Khemric Titan. The Khemric Titan is fucking colossal. It would dwarf one of the bone dragons.
But then again, it's very possible that because of the very nature of dragons and the fact that we never really know how big they can get, it's possible there's a huge bone dragon out there that hasn't been discussed yet.
Yeah, so there could be an Emperor class dragon running around.
Yeah, quite. Somewhere. So the answer to that is
as of to my current knowledge, no. Or yes, there's something bigger than them. What does Nehekhara do with the skeleton kids? They all sleep or just hanging out? There's actually a really morbid thing you could delve into there. Because the interesting thing is most children would not have been ritually killed. They would have been grown to adulthood to serve whatever purpose or functions. However, when Nagash unleashed the Great Plague and killed everyone, and all those people resurrected, you have to remember, though, those people didn't get burial rights. So they would not have come back correctly, necessarily, more than likely. So there's probably a really dark story behind that.
Aranthiel asks, is there any non-Tomb King still alive from when Setra was alive and met him? If so, what did you think of living Setra? The answer is maybe. I mean, there might have been an elf. There might have been someone who was kicking around back then, but there is nothing that's confirmed.
It would have to be an elf. Like there's no dwarfs alive from then.
I mean, the most likely option would be Marlurian. Couldn't resist. One day I'll say his name correctly.
Yeah, but yeah, it's very possible there was an elf diplomat in his court that met him that's still alive. That would not be out of the realms of possibility at all.
In fact, the more I think of it, the more likely, given the stories we have, at least as it currently stands, it's very likely that, let's say, Inarian's son would have been.
Yeah, elves
likely around there at some point.
Depending on the elf's personality, elves probably would have found Setra to be kind of funny in some ways, like dark, but kind of amusing and kind of petulant. Like for a guy obsessed with immortality and then he only lives for 150 years. I think elves can be kind of assholes to humans. The whole like, oh, they're mayflies and they only live for X amount of time, and elves are just kind of dicks in general. An elf's opinion of Setra would probably not have been very high. Other than he was an excellent general, he was an excellent warrior, but like, man, was he so human. Human.
Yeah, poor chap. Yeah. Oh, another one from the is that the Singe? The Ingemeister?
Singemeister.
Relationship
to Araby and Tomb Kings, not good.
Not good.
Very not good. Araby does not like the Tomb Kings. Did not help that Archon the Black came over and unleashed the Wars of the Dead on them for like 1,000 years, where he was just blowing up cities and being Arabians really don't like the Tomb Kings.
Yeah, so I think there is a problem here because as it currently stands, it's very likely Setra should have conquered them all by now. And he hasn't.
Yeah, honestly.
And
there's no reason for him not to have gone across
the fact that he hasn't means that they have got some form of defense against the horrors that Setra can unleash. Which means, if anything, the relations are going to be even more sour because they should be conquered as far as Setra is concerned. And the fact they're not is just another fly in the ointment. So, yeah, not good. Soured.
Yeah. To be fair, you would hope if they've been fighting the undead for like thousands of years at this point, they figured out a pretty reliable method of keeping them out somehow. All right. Last 2 or 3 questions. We know Setra has a habit of jacking English shit who takes his stuff, and it has made for some incredible stories. Are there any races / civilizations you wish Setra would have to go show them who's the real bone man around town? Honestly, there's been some art pieces that have been made of like the Tomb Kings attacking an imperial city because they like took Tomb King stuff and put it on display in like a museum. I would love to get an actual narrative behind that of the Tomb Kings actually invading the empire. Would be really fun and spicy. Like we've had plenty of greenskin invasions through Blackfire Pass. Where's my Tomb King invasion through Blackfire Pass? That'd be fun. But honestly, for me, if I got to see anybody go toe to toe with Setra, or like Setra attack somebody, and I would be giddy, it would probably either be.
Well, while you're mulling, I would like to see Setra go down into the Southlands, so the Southlands are detailed. Hand him his ass, and we can know why.
That would be fun. Yeah, the human tribes or just whoever lives down there.
Yeah, the empires, the kingdoms, whatever we've got down there, big, huge spider jungle people, whatever it is that they decide that they're going to do, I would like to see some of that done because Warhammer has an absolute dearth of diversity. Generally,
why
what
did
Warhammer
his empire stop at the jungles? Like, there's something there.
Largely, what Warhammer has done in the past is take other people's cultures and make them another species. And that is broadly unacceptable. It's time for them to expand and do something new. And I think it would be lovely if this opportunity was taken.
Yeah, I see some comments. Yeah, I think for me, Tomb Kings versus Grand Cathay would be something very special. Getting the big construct battles with like Terracotta Sentinels, trading blows with Necrolith Colossi. I probably wouldn't do it with Setra, but like having the Mortuary Cult fight Grand Cathay would be very fun.
Some fun in that, yeah.
Like have it that Grand Hierophant Katep has gone to Grand Cathay to search for secrets and he's causing problems. That could be very enjoyable.
Yeah.
Okay, the last two questions here. Setra has some of the most powerful artifacts in the setting. How do they stack up to the Children of the Old Ones? Is that Smancy Scarab going to be able to handle the Hand of the Gods? And so, that's a really difficult to answer question.
That's a toughie.
Yeah, because the Warhammer world does not tend to lend itself particularly well to comparisons like that, of like power scaling between very different factions that never fight each other. Granted, Setra's, it's worth noting, the Scarab Brooch is insanely strong. His other artifacts, they're okay. Like the Blade of Patraz, it's all right.
We missed one from Hammond.
No, we didn't. We didn't miss anything.
I mean, how could we miss that?
How do Tomb Kings breed poor Lich Priests? Poor Lich Priests having to deal with that.
Yeah.
There's there would have to be, if I wrote a stupid
I'm pretty sure what you
story,
meant to write was bleed. It was bleed.
If
right?
I was gonna write a really dumb comedy, I would love a tomb prince and princess who are bothering a mortuary cultist, being like, "How do we conceive a kid?" And he's like, "You're dead." And they're like, "No, but how?" And he's like, "You're fucking dead." Stop.
I'm a king. How?
I want more sons. You can't make it work. Anyway,
someone said the real answer. Just
there
sure
you go.
we definitely do it.
Thank you.
There we go.
But
we all knew it.
Yeah, I will
Thank
say
you for sharing it.
The Scarab Brooch is really the only artifact
Brooch.
Setra has that I think is brooch that I would say is like S tier. His other stuff, like even the Chariot of the Gods, it's cool, but it's not like, and that it's because it's literally the most powerful remaining god in a pantheon, exerting a incredible amount of effort on reality to kind of like, it's almost like a reality stabilizer, because it's basically just making it where magic doesn't work, which is a very powerful concept. But like, you compare that against some of the absolute horseshit stuff the Lizardmen have, and it's impressive, but it's very small in scale. Whereas the Lizardmen are throwing around some shit that is just bonkers.
Yeah.
How does Setra view the living? It's very heavily implied that Setra, he would never admit it, but he's immensely jealous a lot of the time of the living, because Setra wants to be an immortal living person. He does not enjoy being undead.
He's got an outcome in mind, and that outcome in mind is to be immortal, not dead.
And then our last question, theoretically, how would Setra and the Nehekhara Empire have fared against the Elven or Dwarf empires at the time? Not well, in my opinion. Because the elves, well, actually, the elves might have struggled because they just did the Sundering. So they actually probably would have been in a not good place. The dwarves would have smacked his ass. They were in their golden age. Like, full golden age, before the War of Vengeance. The dwarves would have been in prime position to deal with Setra.
Yeah, the dwarves would have made a very poor enemy to make. The elves also would have made a very poor enemy to make. Regardless of how weak they may have been, their magic is extraordinary. Their capabilities are at almost their peak also. And for all the vortexes dimming everything down for everyone else, it's their fucking vortex, pardon my French. So I think it would have been an unwise choice. And indeed, there are no strong indications that there was significant battles between them. If anything, it appears to be the opposite. The empire run by Setra expanded without dealing with them. And that, I think, makes a lot of sense and speaks to his strengths as a general. Now, will they rewrite that? Possibly. It's very possible that Setra will meet an elf during the course of the old world that he's already beaten or been beaten by before in the past, because they can do that. And they can just rewrite the past if they wish to do so. That may occur.
Yeah, we do get to see Setra's forces fuck up Tor Enrock. It does not go well for the elves. But the biggest thing to keep in mind about the elves is that they're a naval power, and that is like Setra's biggest weakness, is non-land warfare. The second he has to go on boats, he tends to struggle a bit.
It's a funny one, isn't it? You know, given that they don't need to breathe, they can just do a whole host of things.
Well, yeah, to be fair, though, if the boat sinks, then, like, what's he going to do? Just walk towards you?
but he's not actually lost any of his troops.
True, but
you know, it's an interesting one. How undead wage war
yeah,
is
the
it's
ocean
an
is
interesting
scary
one.
though. And well, plus
Yeah.
the Ulthuan. Ulthuan floats. It's not like the undead can walk to Ulthuan. They have to sail to it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're SOL.
Yeah, it's a funny old one.
Yeah. Anyway, that is it. That's all the questions.
Are we done?
We're done. That was fun. I enjoyed it immensely. Setra's a great character. He's very, very fun. And he's incredibly important. You know, we kind of talked a little bit about like Setra is one of the I don't we've probably said this more times than we should, but Setra is really one of those characters who is he is a kick-off point. Like he is the first domino in a series of events that like caused the end times and brought the world to the way it is. Because it's not even nothing really set up to Setra. It's like Setra is the first domino that causes Nagash, which causes vampires, which causes undead, which causes Sylvania, which causes blah, 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 blah. Setra is the first domino.
Yep. Setra, it's all his fault. And he's still around. And I love the character. I do repeat that I feel that the character has been somewhat underserved. To begin with, the original characters presented in the 4th edition of the Army List wasn't underserved because that character wasn't as developed. But as the editions passed by and Setra grew bigger, the stories that Setra then had to justify that didn't quite match his extraordinary reputation and his extraordinary capability. So I'm super excited by obviously this. And that also nicely leads into what we're doing next week, which is discussing all the changes in this and exactly where it goes next for us all. I'm really looking forward to that.
Malarian the Dread King.
Malarian the Dread King. Malekith is gone. The king is dead. Long live the king. And all of the little changes, some of which we will like, some of which we will be nonplussed by, and others we might have a somewhat spicy take on. Some things will be incredibly minor and no one else in the world except for us will care about. Other things, other people, you might be out there going, I hate that. And we might go, no, actually, we think this rocks. Generally speaking, if you haven't guessed already, both Sotek and I are kind of fans of Warhammer in all of its stripes. And that means that we've already, a long time ago, come to terms with the fact that Warhammer is about as consistent as the ocean. Yes, it's one big thing that we can say is an ocean, but then you realize there's multiple oceans and they all flow through each other and it's constantly wobbling up and down and there's tides and things changing all the time and storms and loosely speaking, Warhammer changes. It's just what it does. And I'm super looking forward to seeing what the changes in this particular box set and all the rest are going to bring to the table. Because for me, the changes are, although it might be a somewhat spicy take, the changes are what makes it exciting for me. If it was all the same, and it was just the regurgitated lore that I knew already, I'd be like, yeah, I'm kind of regretting spending my money on this. I already know it all. Alternatively, and I go through it and I find a name and I'm like, but they're dead. How the hell are they there? Or alternatively, where has the giant town that used to be here gone? That is what gets me going. And obviously the new lore overwrites the old lore. It's always been like that with Games Workshop. But for me, as a fan who tries to make everything work together, who tries to make it all still work even when the changes are put in place, it's those changes that drive that, because without those changes, I'd have nothing to do. So I'm super excited by hopefully what we're going to be discussing next week. I have no idea what I'm putting myself in for. And let's see whether we both rant and rave or whether we were both super complimentary and love every last moment, including Malekith the man.
I'm predicting, based on what I've read, I think we're going to like 85% of it. 10%, I think we're going to go, that's interesting, but weird, but okay. And then 5% we're going to go, fuck.
Oh, there's always the 5% of fuck, isn't there?
Yeah.
That's going to be the fun part. So, as always, if you've got any questions about the Old World box set, if you've got one of the Old World rules, the Old World new armies, or anything else, go drop them over on Sotek's channel over on Discord. If you're not a member there already, why? Because that's where we do all our pre-posted questions.
Yeah, also, real quick, just little things. If you're here, please consider hitting that like button. I would really appreciate it. It helps kind of spread the stream around so that more people are made aware of it and can check it out. Also, if you haven't subscribed, please do. I would appreciate the support. I would like to. I would really love to get. It's probably not possible. I'd love to get to like 100K this year.
100K. That's the goal we're all going for. Just think of 100K.
Make sure you go check out LAWhammer, which are back. They just did a stream this past Friday. It was marvelous and really fucking disgusting, to be honest.
It was sweary.
It was
oh my goodness,
gross. Don't eat when you're watching it. But go subscribe to LAWhammer because we're very close to 5K, which will be an awesome threshold to cross because that's when I'm going to release a quick head taker lore video, which is going to be super fucking long. And it's all super fun and awesome stuff. So, and you got anything else?
Yes, I am going to say thank you so much. We've opened the year in such a marvelous fashion. We get together every week and we always wonder, I wonder what's going to happen. And it's always an absolute joy. And it's not just a joy because we get on and we get to talk about shit that we really love. It's a joy because all of your comments, all of your questions, all of the things that come up mean that we end up going in directions that we never expect. And we always, at the end of our streams, have a quick chat afterwards going, well, holy shit, wasn't that awesome? Who'd have thought about this thing? And I'm really glad that came up. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what this year brings because this year, unlike our previous year, when we started doing this together rather than Sotek doing it as a stream by himself or with others, this year we've got ourselves a wealth of new material coming, not just for Warhammer, but from Games Workshop directly for Warhammer, which gives us a wealth of new, exciting things for us all to talk about over the course of this year. And I'm beyond excited. It's going to be awesome. And yeah, that's it, I think. Always nice to share. I'm excited. It's going to be cool.
It's like, oh, Warhammer Fantasy is a tabletop game, and now there's a new roleplay game coming out, and this other thing, and this other thing. It's what a time to be alive. All right. Thank you all so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed the stream, and we'll see you next week on Andy's channel. We will be
on my channel next week.
We'll be on the LAWhammer channel next week.
Of course.
So,
of course.
Same time, same place for that, I guess.
Or Thomas said my channel. That's the same place.
All right. Thanks for watching.
Please. We didn't say anything. Bye. Setra's